and the current process and current reports. We stand in recess until 2:45.
No, go ahead. In fact, if you have the time to comment on it when you come back, I would appreciate it. If you don't, please. Can we guys shoot for that? Okay.
Committee will come back to order. My apologies to everybody for the delay. As you can tell from all the lights, we've had some back-to-back votes, and we had a small legislative logjam, which just tied us up a little bit from getting back here, and I appreciate your patience, and I apologize for the delay. We were on the last area of live sighting reports from the so-called cluster groupings, and specifically on the Adamsai area of Laos. We looked at number 995, and you had offered us your reasons as to why 995 was deemed to be initially concerns about fabrication, and finally it was Soviets who were determined to be in their place.
Sir.
Do you have anything to add to that, or do we move on to the next one?
Well, sir, with regard to indications that live American POWs are in this area,
can you pull a mic close?
there are indications that over 2,000 Soviets were in country between this period and into the 80s.
How many of them were indicated to be under guard?
Most of those Soviets, practically all of those Soviets that moved about the country were under guard.
With guards?
Yes, sir. That was a normal practice. Guards or escorts for their protection, primarily because of the resistance elements throughout the country. Now, it should be noted that this area where
was
the
particularly
individual...
unsafe, was it not?
Yes, sir, it was unsafe.
I might add, it remains unsafe up until today. There were areas that we flew over where we were not allowed to fly low because of the threat of our being shot at. And that's in 1992.
Sir, same situation.
So,
and the area of the sighting that this individual has reported up in Mung Kwa, Phongsali province, is an area in which the resistance has access and moves through at will. So the resistance is well attuned to the PW issue and has been for years.
but principally it is deduction that leads you to say it is Soviets. It is not anything empirical here. It is deduction, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Coupled with the additional elements of your determination that lent you to believe this person was evasive or fabricating. Is that right?
No, sir. We've never indicated that he was fabricating.
Okay, there's
he
no,
says he
well,
saw
I
Caucasians.
have here resolution, interim fabrication.
That's one of the earlier evaluations. The final evaluation
that contradicts what you just said. You said there never was any indication of fabrication. Here's a written indication of fabrication.
There were several noted inconsistencies in what the source had to say.
But initially you thought it might be fabrication,
yes.
Correct?
Then analysts working this case thought it was a fabrication, absolutely.
And then subsequently you said, no, it's not fabrication.
That's right.
But rather, we're convinced he saw Soviet.
Yes, sir.
So
based on the information we gained in the mid to late 80s, it was determined Soviets were in this area.
But is that the only thing that allows you to draw it? Soviets were in the area, therefore it was Soviets.
We have, again, a body of reporting from people who were held in this area in seminar camps, who were able to move throughout the province, and they say there were Soviets in the area, there were no American POWs.
Approximately how many interviews provide the basis of that?
We did 60 within our office, and as I indicated yesterday, when you take into account JCRC interviews and Stony Beach interviews, you're talking well over 1,000.
Okay.
We also have a screening project ongoing in Thailand among the refugee camps of Ban Vinai, Chien Kam, and we have thus far screened over 1,000 people of 42,000, and that's our goal, to screen all of them.
Incidentally,
they say
I'm sorry.
there are no PWs in that area.
Going back to the Baron 52 thing for 1 minute, a question occurred to me when I was on the Senate floor. Did the one-sentence interception that was transferred and later reinterpreted, did either of those interpretations of the one sentence mention the word American?
No, sir.
Okay. They exclusively referred to pilot or pirate.
That's correct.
Thank you. Now, let's turn to source 5169. This is a DIA interview in May of 1986 of a former Royal Lao Army Master Sergeant. The date of his citing or investigation was March 1977. The citing asserts that he saw an inmate at the Huilang prison, Muang Kua. Source saw Caucasians being transferred under guard from a truck to a riverboat. The source was on a work detail away from the prison. Caucasians were not shackled, but were guarded by 4 Lao police. The prisoners wore seminar cap uniforms and Chinese shoes. A Lao guard of source's work detail told this source that the prisoners were American POWs being moved downriver from Modam Sai because of resistance activity and were to be flown to a prison in southern Laos. A resolution, nationality not determined, but you did determine that they weren't United States POWs. Is that correct?
United States POWs? No, sir. Indications were that these were Soviets again.
Okay, again, what is the indication that they were Soviets?
They were dressed in blue uniforms. The Soviets in this area dressed in either blue or olive drab uniforms. They traveled in groups. In this case, 8 came to the riverbank and got on a boat. They were on a truck, which is probably a Soviet truck, and escorted by Lao police.
None of them were restrained in any manner.
None of them were restrained, no, sir. We asked this source to come to Washington for further interview. We also asked him to take a polygraph. He refused in both cases to cooperate.
You did learn of a 10-person Soviet advisory team assigned there?
Yes, sir.
And also 7 Chinese prisoners? But this person said specifically that these were 7 Caucasians.
Yes, sir.
So I would assume that eliminates the Chinese.
We have thought all along he was looking at Soviets as opposed to the Chinese, because the Chinese were held in Huilang camp also, where he was held.
You determined that the teams traveled by Russian truck from Muang Kua and they were escorted by armed Lao personnel?
Yes, sir. That was a common practice. From sources.
And they were working throughout that area from 1976 through 1983?
Yes, sir. They were indeed.
The Caucasians were not restrained, and they appeared to be under escort rather than under guard. Did the source confirm that? That they were under escort rather than guard?
No, sir. That distinction was never made with the source.
So again, your determination that this is...
These were Soviets moving throughout the area, which would account for his having cited Caucasians. Soviets were in this area. Other sources from the same seminar camp say there were no American POWs there.
Moreover, he does not say he noticed Americans per se. He says here that he learned that they were American POWs. Is that correct?
He saw Caucasians.
Now, again, is that sufficient? Help us to understand the sort of analytical process and standards that are applied here. You're making really a deduction again. I mean, here are 2 deductions by which you eliminate a particular live sighting report. Is that a deduction that you can have confidence in, or is that a deduction that's merely kind of, well, here's one way to explain it, but which also might lend credibility to people's notion about a mindset to debunk? I mean, if you want to find a Russian, you can find a Russian. But if you don't necessarily, you know, dispositively ascertain that it is not what it was purported to be.
But the body of reporting from this area, from other sources, the many, many people that we've interviewed, that have been interviewed in the refugee camps, indicate American POWs were not there at that time. They indicate that Soviets were. It should be
Give
noted.
us, again, a sense, in this particular area, in the Odom Sai area of Laos, approximately how many reports would you have culled to make that determination of Americans not being there?
Udum side, we've got 26 separate sources that we've interviewed. And then in the province to the north, 31 separate sources.
And that doesn't, I don't believe that also counts the screening that's been done in the refugee camps in Thailand.
Hold on just 1 minute. I'm not good at listening to
I'm
Tim.
sorry.
It's all right.
This is out of that file. This report is in both this file and in 995. This is what the source of this Soviet data said. At no time ever visited the camps. And that's particularly germane to 995.
This is the same source?
It's the same cable. Same cables in both files. And we're just reading the files there.
Okay, reading from your file on 5169, paragraph 6. While at Muang Kua, source visited the seminar camp for former Lao officers located approximately 5 kilometers southwest of Muang Kua and designated the Muang Kua Seminar Camp, also called the Sop Kai Seminar Camp. He was aware of the existence of Hoi Leng Prison 12 kilometers north of Muang Kua, but never visited this camp because it was a prison for criminal offenders and not a seminar camp for former Lao government personnel. At no time did any of the Soviets ever visit Muang Kua, aka Sop Kai, or the Huang Lang detention camps. Now, I'm not sure that that is
That's
inconsistent.
saying the Soviets did not go into
Yeah,
the seminar
I mean, it's saying they
camps.
didn't go into the camps,
Right.
correct?
995 was in a camp. They said he saw Soviets.
What do you mean?
Your first source was in a camp. The sighting was in a camp.
So the first,
995.
yeah.
Here's the same cable. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's just a question of clarification.
But as to, I understand, but as to 5169, there's no allegation that they went into the camps, but that's not what you're saying. They
No,
were in
sir.
the area, they just didn't go
They
into
were in the
camp.
area and based out of Muang Kua.
Okay, now if they didn't go into that camp, what Mr. McCreary is pointing out that in the prior report, the person was in a camp, and you determined that they were Soviets in that camp.
Yes, sir.
So here you have a statement that they didn't go into the camps,
Did not go into the seminar camps.
but here you discern that somebody who was in a camp was in fact Soviets.
That was not a camp that he went into. He was delivering supplies. The earlier source was delivering supplies into the area. There is a government facility in this area, which is a storage and transshipment point. We think that's where the sighting occurred. Soviets would have been there. Had nothing to do with a seminar camp.
I just want to make sure the record is clear on this. The sighting, he saw them in captivity at a camp west of Muang Kua. So he saw them at a camp.
Is this the first source?
This is
you were-
995. In 995, when the truck pulled into the prison compound, so we're in a prison compound, you have decided that these are Soviets in the prison compound. In
Sir,
this,
he had no idea where he was. He was told that he was in the area of Muang Kua, and he was there to deliver supplies. No indication that that was a prison camp. And certainly not a seminar camp.
Okay. I stand corrected, and I think that our record ought to stand corrected. The summary said drove into a prison camp. Now, if there's something here that says he drove into a prison, but right here it says he observed while delivering supplies to a Pathet Lao field unit.
His testimony is that he made a wrong turn and turned into the camp. And that's,
Where is that? Do you have that?
let me check on it. My phone's really screwed up.
I think I have it here.
That's the description of subjects.
What puzzles me a little bit here is that the source on 995 claims that he saw Americans, but that repeatedly the source says that he was aware of Soviets in the vicinity and he was able to identify the individuals as Soviets based on information from other people. So I sort of get a sense that this person was aware of the Soviets and was distinguishing them from other people that he may have seen.
I'm not aware that he was able to distinguish among Soviets and other Caucasians.
My summary here, Senator, says that on 995, that he saw 6 white men and that a guard told him later that they were U.S. prisoners, not that he distinguished that they were U.S. prisoners.
Well, let me read to you. Here's your summary. Circumstances of sighting. While riding in a truck convoy carrying supplies to Pathet Lao camps, trucks entered wrong camp. So they went into a camp and they had to back out. In the rear view mirror, the source observed 6 Caucasians. The Pathet Lao, he says the Pathet Lao guard told them they're American prisoners. Now, subsequently, as you discuss this source, you say the following. Starting in 1976, a military-colored Mi-8 began flying into the airport at Utai. 4 Caucasian male Soviets normally came on each flight, staying at Utai for periods from 1 day to 1 week. Aircraft pilots were Vietnamese. When Source first arrived at Mon Qua in mid-1979, he found a 10-man Soviet team operating at the Phong Sali provincial headquarters. He was able to identify the individuals, all Caucasian males wearing nondescript civilian clothing, as Soviets based on information from other Lao and Vietnamese medical personnel with whom the source was working at the time. The Soviet personnel were reportedly an advisory team and provided technical advice on a variety of subjects to Lao provincial authorities. And it goes on. The Soviet technicians traveled from their base in Mon Qua to various locations in northern Laos, to include Luang Prabang City, Vientiane City, Dam Sai Province, and so forth. Source recalled observing the 10-man Soviet advisory team at Mon Qua each time he visited there during 1979 to 83. The Soviets appeared to have freedom of movement and were not accompanied by Soviet guards while at Mon Qua. On a number of occasions, Source observed the Soviets arrive at or depart from Mon Qua. So, I mean, this guy seems to have a pretty good sense of who the Soviets are.
Sir, those are not the same sources. You have 0995, who saw 6 in the camp through the rearview mirror as he was leaving the camp. The other report that you just read from is another Lao refugee who was released.
Does that refer to 5169?
No, sir. That's still a separate source.
Still a separate source?
Yes, sir.
Used as a rebuttal witness for both of these.
Okay. Now, John, would you mind taking a chair over there and I can ask a question here so that we get this straight? Okay. Now, you're now saying that this is a third source who somehow provides a rebuttal to each of the sources that they've analyzed. This is a third source?
Yes. Pardon, yes, Senator.
This is a third
This
source?
is a third source.
Okay, so this person only provides rebuttal by virtue of this person saying that when this person was in a specific camp, the Soviets didn't come into that camp. That's the only...
As I understand the cable, it is a general description of Soviet behavior in Laos. It is not specifically a rebuttal to
Well-
either of the sources. It supports what your observation about deduction, the use of deduction.
But I understand that. It means that in a certain circumstance, that Soviet team was behaving that way.
That's my understanding of it.
But what they're saying is they have information that indicates that in a different place at a different time, people were behaving differently.
This is the same place, Senator. It's Mongkua, as I understand, if I read the file correctly. It is Mongkua, and that's what we're talking about for both of these live sightings.
Are we talking about Mongkua for 995?
Yes, Senator.
How do we know? They backed into a camp that they can't
He
describe.
said he was west of Mongkua. That's what he thought
Well, that's not Mongkua, that's west of Mongkua.
It's just slightly west. That's right.
But it doesn't mean it's Mongkua.
I couldn't agree more. Yes, right, Senator.
Sir, based on the description
not
provided by this source as to the area that he was in, he said the area of Mung Kwa. 10 separate imagery analyses were done trying to find the exact camp that he had described. It could not be found.
It didn't match any of the camps that you had imagery of?
It doesn't match, no, sir.
Senator,
Now, he says he was told he's in Mung Kwa when the sighting occurred by his friend who was in the truck. And based on that, and based on the third source's information, that sources were based out of Mung Kwa, and he indicates how they travel throughout the area. There were Soviets in that area at that time, and we feel that 0995 observed those Soviets.
Senator, on the issue of imagery, of aerial photography, there is a statement in the file of 5169 that says, in the file that we've had in Senate Security, I don't think it was redacted, that says imagery continues to show a camp in this location.
Is there
I-
any,
you know,
is
I
that
don't
inconsistent?
So that's the second report. The second report concerns the seminar camp, Hui Lang, which is just north of Mung Kwa, about 12 kilometers.
So
That's where he was located.
is Mr. McCurry confusing the two? Or mixing the two?
I think mixing the two.
Mixing.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So they are separate and distinct. In one case, there was no capacity to identify. In another, you can identify the place.
That's right.
But it refers to a different
sir.
place that you are aware of and where there is no indication of Americans.
Yes, sir. Hui Lang camp, we have many, many people who were held in that camp just north of Mung Kwa, and they say there were no American POWs there.
All right, let me direct your attention. Do you have any further
Yes,
questions?
I do on that. Senator, I may be mistaken because I'm only dealing with the files I've been provided, but the
Well, are you
imagery,
suggesting
imagery,
there are,
the
hold on.
imagery
Are
readout
there other
says,
files?
well, we have, I don't, you know, the files are redacted, but the imagery readout that I have says imagery continues to show a camp at, the camp at Mongkua, not the camp at Huilong, the camp at Mongkua. That's a direct quote as I remember it.
Does it? Gentlemen?
I'm not aware of the camp at Mung Kwa in the readout.
That's what the readout said. It's a direct quote from the readout.
Well,
Yes.
haven't you seen
Senator.
the unredacted file in Senate 407 on this case?
That's the basis on which I'm making the statement, Senator. And the basis of the file, the unredacted as opposed to the declassified file.
All right, well, can we make a note to check that, please? This particular file in unredacted form, so we can determine what the imagery says, and then we'll follow up with you on that.
Sir.
Should be noted, sir, with regard to this source, that while he was being, during the period, over 10 years, that he was being polygraphed and interviewed, he changed the description of the camp. Based on that, we went out and did further analysis, simply could not find the camp as he described. Over 10 efforts, or 10 attempts were made.
10 different attempts?
Yes, sir. We couldn't find that camp.
Let me direct you to 5343. This is a field report through the CIA, traveler/student, reported in '86 about a sighting or investigation of mid-April '86, hearsay sighting. 5343 reported via control channels that she saw 7 Vietnamese Army guards controlling 3 Caucasians 8 kilometers east of Muang Noi. She thought they were Soviet advisors, but noticed they had on leg irons. Villagers told her they were American prisoners captured before 1972. In a subsequent time, a second source related that a Lao soldier told him that there were 12 men and 4 female American prisoners west of Muang Noi. POWs were held in a cave guarded by 8 Vietnamese and 14 Pathet Lao. Comment?
When we received these reports initially, we thought we had firsthand live sighting reports. We went back to the agency and said, we need these areas checked out as soon as possible. They went back, they checked out the areas, they checked out their initial source, only to find out that the individual had lied about going in and contacting these sources, that he had information that he picked up in Thailand, that he never went into the country. He was polygraphed, there was deception indicated.
So you determined this is just not true?
It was hearsay reporting, and we took other attempts to check out this information. It just did not pan out.
Okay. $5,993.
This report is comparable to the last one you read, sir, with regard to
This
another
is an allegation
agency.
of 7 American POWs being
Yes, sir.
detained at a camp near Odom-Sai District. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you determined this to be?
This was, again, a hearsay report that came to the agency via a letter from one of their sources. They never got back to the original source and checked out the information. In their analysis, they indicated that his claim that PWs were captured at Nam Bak in 1968 simply was not true, that Americans were not at that camp.
Nam Bak, there were no Americans even stationed there?
That's right, sir. They visited the area, but none were lost or captured at Nam Bak. That's in the agency's analysis.
Number 6356. This is a source, Lao resistance leader, 1987. The date of incident is August 1986. The sighting is allegedly a covert agent report that said 21 U.S. POWs remain in Udam-Sai. The report stated the agent learned POW information from his relative, a Pathet Lao soldier who had been a guard at Udam-Sai Seminar Prison. He said that the U.S. People are not at the prison but held separately nearby. Analysis?
I interviewed this source, sir, in Bangkok, Thailand in 1987. He indicated that he had nothing more than the initial report, that he was going back to check out the information and would be back to us immediately with any follow-up. He never came back.
And he never came back.
Never came back.
Is there any summary that you have with respect to the Udam-Sai area in total about the overall analysis that has been made there, the degree to which the territory has been examined and covered and so forth?
There's several points that should be made with regard to Udam-Sai, Luang Prabang, and Pong Sali, the 3 areas for which this cluster was brought together. First of all, as I pointed out earlier, the resistance, the Lao resistance, has complete access to all 3 provinces. They're well attuned to the fact that there are reward offers of millions of dollars if they bring out live PWs. They have been looking for live PWs on a daily basis. Early on, the Lao resistance turned in some hearsay reporting. They made up some of the reporting on their own, and we said through their channels, knock it off. If you have valid information, we want it. Otherwise, do not use the PW issue for monetary gain or to run your stories, because it's not going to be accepted. But the resistance has access to those areas. We have access to the resistance leaders. They have told us to a person that if they get PW information, we'll be the first to know. They've had no valid PW information from any of these 3 provinces. As I indicated, Soviets are throughout all 3 provinces, and the number may have been as high as 2,000 at one time of Soviet advisors and technicians in country.
Do we have access to Udomsai now?
Yes, sir.
And when
I'm sorry, Udomsai, we'd have to go through the Lao government to get access.
Have we been there?
No, sir.
We have not been there recently?
Not recent. We have not been there at all.
Have we requested to go there?
No, sir.
Why not?
Because the operations, the excavations being conducted in country have all been in the south.
Well, I understand, but we're talking about live sighting reports. Live sightings being a priority. I mean, aren't live sightings a greater priority than excavations?
Absolutely.
They are.
Why aren't we putting first energy into running down every live sighting report?
The Lao government has not yet accepted U.S. proposals to base a live sighting investigator.
Have we
in country.
requested it?
We have indeed.
Yes, sir.
In Udomsai?
We've requested that the live sighting investigator be based in the embassy and have freedom of movement throughout the country of Laos.
Well, now, freedom of movement is not actually possible throughout Laos.
Well,
isn't that accurate?
It has to be with government assistance. But we would try ultimately to have the same kind of an understanding that we're still trying to reach with the Vietnamese, wherein we let them know the general area to which we want to go, and only having arrived in the general area would we give them the indication of our final destination. But that's still under negotiation. I spoke with Ambassador Charlie Salmon last week and impressed upon him again, and he's well aware of the requirement for a valid investigative program. And I'm going to Laos next week along with Colonel Cole and some other officials, and we intend to press the case for this again when we're in country.
Well, let me, is it my understanding that we are going to be going into the Baron 52 site, that has now been approved?
It is in the Lao work plan. Yes, sir.
And when are we going into that site?
We don't have a date that they're going in, but it's this year, later
Well, I
this year.
take it that if you can get into the back area of that fuselage, you're going to be able to answer some questions, are you not?
Absolutely.
Is that a priority?
Yes, sir. It is a priority.
Senator Smith?
I really don't have any further questions at this time on this, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, let me ask you, what is the reason that you repeatedly interview the same sources over a period like source number 0995, you went over a period of 10 years, you would talk to this person?
Over a period of 10 years, we had 5 separate analysts working this case. And as each analyst picked up the case, they went for further interview. In 1983 and 84, we had the Lao language capability in our office. So we asked for another interview to interview the individual in his native language, and that was the first time that we had been able to do that. So each of these analysts simply picked up the case and went for further interviews. There were always questions from interview to interview that we just never had a good answer to. And finally he said, I'm sick and tired of the PW issue. I'm not talking to you anymore.
Now, let's move, if we can, if there are no further questions about the Udomsai area, let me ask you generically about Laos. Do you believe right now that you have any evidence at all in DIA that is credible, that indicates somebody might be alive in Laos at this point in time?
No, sir. Not based on the live sighting reports that we have seen since 1984 to present. The proof is not there.
If we had such information, which some have characterized as smoking gun information, not a term that I might always want to use, but if we had such information, this committee would have already been briefed on it, and the top leadership in the Defense Department would have already been briefed on it, and knowing what I know about that top leadership, we would have taken some action to have followed up on it.
Do you have any evidence whatsoever that is credible that somebody may be alive in Vietnam?
No, sir.
The answer is no?
No, sir.
How many current live sighting reports are there for Vietnam that are unresolved?
We have a total,
Do we have a group of people coming in on the second panel? This is a good segue into the second panel. Can we, I think Colonel Cole and Mr. Steve Johnson are going to be adding, or am I wrong?
Mr. Chairman, before they come up, I did want to just take about a minute to revisit some information that I'm not clear on, just to ask while they're here regarding some photograph, the satellite imagery. It'll only take a second if I could have the indulgence of the chairman. Let me, I'll need to, it'll only take a second, but I'm going to need to use that mic because I'm going to have to be over there. I just need to clarify, before I leave the mic, I had asked for some imagery on the Ly Nam Day, as you know, Bob, and you provided me some photographs, which I have, and I'm confused as to what is the actual imagery, and I just want to, I don't know if I can do it from here without, maybe I can. I'll wait till they put them up. Just want to make sure we're all working from the same document. Just place them so that the panel can see the two sets of photographs, three sets.
Right behind the things there. See them in the tie.
The photographs that are up there are photographs of what we call the Citadel. Could you indicate to me which are the actual photographs as you understand them to be of that area of Hanoi? Bob, you and Mr. DeStott rather indicated that you had been around there. I'm confused as to whether it's the photographs in gray or the photographs in yellow, which are the actual photographs. One set of photographs is the exact reverse of the other, and I don't know which one of those photographs is the actual is actually the way it's supposed to be. The ones that you provided me were the gray ones on the left.
Well, let me begin by pointing out that this is the first time I've seen these boards here, so it'll take me
Right.
a while
Let me help
to
a little
orient
bit.
myself.
No, I understand. I'm not trying to. The Citadel area, I think we got Ly Nam Day Street there, and the west of Ly Nam Day is supposedly the area known as the Citadel, moving across the block toward the Ho Chi Minh Mausoleum and the War Museum, and that whole area inside those perimeter of those streets. Those are the photos that you provided this morning, and I just put them up there. But it seems to me, as I look at it, I was only there twice actually, but once where I walked down that street, and it doesn't seem right to me. It seems to me that the photos that you gave me are in fact reversed.
Well, first off, I didn't give them to you. I don't know.
No, you didn't. Your agency did. Because
it appears to me, I'm not an imagery expert, but it appears to me that somebody has put the negative in reverse to take this photograph. This looks like a mirror image of Ly Nam Day Street.
So in other words, the one on the left is a mirror is reversed.
That's what it appears to me.
And it's not.
This Alcatraz should be, or what the PW is called Alcatraz should be behind this building. If I'm orienting myself correctly, this is the villa at number 17 Ly Nam Day Street right here. If that were the case, then Ly Nam Day Street should be down here.
Then move your hand to the right.
And over here should be a railroad trestle, and it's not there. So
move your hand to the right then. Does the same photograph now reversed? Does that look more like it? Should be the same photograph.
Yes, this is Ly Nam Day Street here, and this is its intersection with I forget the name of the street, Funding Pung, I believe. Okay, yes. Okay, Funding Pung. And this is the, this building here, back during the war in any event, belonged to the Army Publishing House, as I recall. And what the PW is called Alcatraz was located roughly back in here.
Okay, well, I accept your expertise on that, and I apologize for putting you on the spot for it. But my concern is this, Mr. Chairman. I asked for these photographs, and they were provided, I believe, this morning. They may have been yesterday, but they were provided by Mr. Sheets. And we spent a day yesterday, or 3/4 of a day, on this area. And I'm not. This is not directed at Mr. Destat because he simply identified them. He was not involved in this. But we spent a day looking at imagery and discussing live sighting reports in this Citadel area. We spent a whole 3/4 of a day in hearings. And the record must show, based on what Mr. Destat has told me, that the photographs that were provided to the Vice Chairman of the committee in order for me to prepare for this meeting are the exact reverse of the actual photographs. So what I was given was the reverse of the actual photograph of those locations. And I was wondering why I could not match. As I went through this thing yesterday, I almost drove myself crazy trying to figure out why people who were saying they were going in the north entrance were in fact going into the south entrance. As a matter of fact, the reason why I was able to realize this was because I looked at a porch on one of those buildings where I had visited in 1986 and was trying to figure out why, when I came out of that porch, that I didn't come out on Lee Nam Day Street, rather I came out on the railroad track on the other side. Now I know why. The imagery is totally reversed. Now, I am simply not going to sit here and be involved in this kind of action. This is either an accident, and if it is an accident, then what the hell do you people know about what's going on? If it is not an accident, now wait, now if it is not, I'm not looking for applause, please. If it is not an accident, then it was deliberately provided to me. Now the next question, gentlemen, is, are you showing the witnesses, the people, the sources, are you showing them reversed imagery and asking them to try to find their way into those locations? I hope not.
I think the explanation for this is somewhat embarrassing, but rather simple, and certainly not sinister. The Senator asked for some prints of this. As the Senator well knows, a briefing board was provided in closed session that was based on other capabilities, and that briefing board could not be brought into this session because the capabilities that were used were inappropriate for this setting, could not be declassified for this setting. So the Senator asked for some imagery, and our imagery shop apparently went into the archives, pulled out a negative, and in running the prints of the negative, they inadvertently here, it would appear to me, put the negative in the negative carrier backwards when they ran the prints. Well, it's regrettable. It is certainly not intentional, and it was not a misrepresentation of reality. We need to, because the committee has had access to the briefing boards that properly lay out this area in all the prior analytic sessions that we've had with this committee.
We need to move on.
These photographs were delivered yesterday. It's a regrettable mistake. I apologize for it, and there was certainly no intent to deceive this committee.
We need to move on to the next subject, but the only reason...
on that subject, how long would it take you to figure out that you got reverse imagery?
Shouldn't take
Maybe about 10 minutes?
I would think so.
Thank you.
I mean, it would just seem, I don't know. I mean, it's just very frustrating, guys, really. I mean, this was the subject of a hearing. The Citadel was the subject of a hearing. I sent a letter 2 weeks in advance. And I asked for this stuff to be provided. I didn't get it until the morning of the hearing, and it turned out that's what I got. And I'm sitting there looking at that stuff, trying to figure out why in the hell I can't match what you're saying. Now, I'm just going to tell you, so we move on. I'm going to put you on notice right now. I'm going to review every damn one of the live sighting reports that pertain to that Citadel, and I'll tell you, the descriptions in here on these interviews better not match up to that reverse imagery, or there's going to be a real serious problem.
I want to understand the last, what should not match up?
If the interviews with the sources whose claim that they went in such and such a door came out, if they match up with the reverse imagery, then there's deliberate deceit.
Sir, if I could comment.
I don't know that. I don't know if they do or not because I haven't had time to look at it.
To the best of my knowledge, the only imagery that's ever been shown to any source is a group of photographs or images that were made from some photography made by a drone aircraft in 1972. I personally had those photographs made up. I personally distributed those photographs to the debriefers that use them around the world, and I personally give you my assurance that those photographs are not reverse images. Those photographs reflect the true nature of it. To the best of my knowledge, now as you all know, I've just returned from a long trip overseas, and I came in from vacation to come in here. So recent activities, I'm not fully up to speed, but it's my understanding that these photographs that we're looking at here were made in response to a specific request made very recently by the Select Committee, and this is a one-time event. There are no other reverse images out there anywhere.
And just to put the record straight, I think the Senator will admit I've had 3 separate conversations with him over the past 2 days, trying to straighten out why I could not bring the briefing board in here that he was making reference to. He agreed with me that that was appropriate, and I apologize again
listen, if that's all it is, no apology necessary. But I just want to say to you, I just want to point out, as you look at this, these are old, dated photos.
Agreed.
And my concern is that that's the stuff that you guys have been using while you've been debriefing your sources. And I'm just saying to you, I'm going to check every one of them because, frankly, I don't trust you to do it. I'm going to check every single one of them between now and Tuesday, and they better be right.
Are we prepared now to move into the next panel area?
I am. I can answer your question of a second ago. Of the 110 live sighting cases that are open right now for investigation, 92 of them relate to Vietnam.
92 relate? Sorry. Let me ask you a question now. Can you, it'd be good if you folks could report back to us, what are we today, Wednesday? Could you check your own files on this to make certain that about this imagery reverse issue?
Yes, sir. Will do.
Could you report to us by Friday? Is that possible?
We will.
So that we could at least have your report on it too. Be helpful. Now, we turn to the final category and area of these 2 days of hearings, and that is the unresolved first-hand live sighting reports. Now, we have to caution that some of these are still under investigation. So there are certain aspects of them, because they are under investigation, that we can't go into publicly. But we're going to try to elicit as much baseline information about them as is possible so that we know what we're dealing with. I'd like to ask the 2 people who have joined here, Colonel Cole, if you, and I guess Mr. Johnson, if you would both rise and be sworn in, please. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Would you each identify yourselves quickly for the record?
My name is Stephen Johnson, and I'm analyst for Indochina in the Department of State's Bureau of Intelligence and Research.
I'm Colonel John Cole. I'm with the Defense Intelligence Agency. I'm in charge of the Stony Beach team in Bangkok.
Okay. Mr. Sheets, I understand you have an opening for this portion of the hearing?
I do.
Okay, why don't you make your opening statement for this portion of the hearing, and then we'll proceed.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to open this final panel of the committee's inquiry into the live prisoner question. Before moving into several key points concerning DIA's analytic and investigative procedures, I want to highlight for this committee, the Congress, and the American people the lengths to which DIA has gone to support the important work of this committee. Through the Department of Defense Central Documentation Office, DoD has answered over 275 separate committee requests for information, 153 of which required the direct support of DIA's Special Office for POWs and MIAs. DoD has provided over 1 million pages of information for the committee's review, many of which were provided by my office. Indeed, all 15,090 intelligence reports received by DI since 1975 have been made available. Most of the 2,266 case files have been brought to Capitol Hill for review by your staffers, and the already overburdened analytic personnel in my office have been made available for lengthy deposition sessions. No effort has been spared in making our files and our knowledge accessible to this committee. In addition to the thousands of hours spent by intelligence technicians and other support personnel in pulling files, constructing summaries and tabulations, and performing the numerous database extracts requested by committee staff, my estimate is that over the past 9 months, over 25% of the total analytic effort of my office has been consumed in supporting this committee. While no one at DoD questions the legitimate oversight responsibility of the Congress on this vital issue, I would only point out to the committee that the heavy additional workload resulting from this committee's work couldn't be hitting my office at a less opportune time, a time when the pace and scope of the Joint Task Force full accounting field operations have drastically increased, basically doubling and in some cases tripling pre-deployment intelligence briefing and post-deployment analytic requirements. The in-country live sighting investigation process, long advocated by DIA, is now in place in Vietnam, admittedly with some growing pains. Case preparation and analysis in this vital area cannot take a backseat to any other requirement. The Vietnamese government has begun to permit DIA investigators to pursue the vital archival research mission, although I might add that actual performance on these promises has been mixed. And finally, the Russian government is actively supporting follow-up of allegations resulting from possible POWs from the Vietnam War. In short, the analytic challenge in my office has increased drastically. At the same time, this committee has laid claim to at least 25% of our available staffing. In making the foregoing points, I am not attempting to call into question the legitimate oversight responsibilities of the Congress. I only want to explain that for the last year, my office has been strained to its limits to respond to the committee's taskings and at the same time perform the most urgent of our regularly assigned duties. I hope the committee will understand that if sometimes we are slower in responding to taskings than we all would like, it is because we are attempting to keep up performance of our assigned mission and maintain the quality of current operations at as high a level as is possible. This panel has been convened this afternoon to discuss the nature and scope of current DIA operations with regard to the live POW issue. We have been asked to discuss how we handle a live sighting report and to give you an idea of how we go about the task of collecting, analyzing, and following up on each report. We will also outline how these reports are evaluated and the process through which our findings are reviewed. To aid in this discussion, I have prepared a chart that summarizes the intelligence cycle for each live sighting report. And that's the chart here with the yellow blocks. Would somebody go point for me on the chart? As you can see, we have depicted DIA's work as a cycle in which each report and each piece of information flows into the body of intelligence available on the POW-MIA issue. Even after analysis, evaluation, and formal review are completed, each report is repeatedly examined as new reports come to us, and we continue our cycle of work. I'd like to take a moment to walk you through the intelligence cycle for each live sighting report. The cycle begins with the collection of the information and preparation of an initial report. These reports come in through various channels. Most are collected through DIA's extensive refugee screening program, which Colonel Cole will describe. Other reports come from persons who come to us voluntarily, including walk-ins to DIA offices in Indochina, or refugees and travelers who contact us in the United States. A few come to us from persons who contact U.S. embassies around the world. All of these reports, regardless of source, are sent to my office. When we receive the report, it is promptly entered into our database, and an analyst is assigned responsibility for conducting immediate initial analysis. This first analytical look includes a complete search of all of our databases to determine if we have any prior reporting that might shed light on this report. We look at all the reports from the same geographic area. We look for similarities in stories. We check not only human source reporting, but also information from other sources available to us. When relevant, we consult special sources such as our prison database. Once the analyst has completed first stage analysis, he or she determines whether additional follow-up is necessary, and if so, what that follow-up should be. Not all reports require follow-up. We receive many reports that contain accurate and easily recognized accounts of wartime events and of Americans caught up in the fall of Indochina. These can usually be evaluated without result to additional outside follow-up. Some reports, however, clearly call for further collection. For instance, it may be necessary to re-interview the source, to ask additional questions, or to clarify certain issues. It may also be necessary to interview additional people. For example, persons identified by the source himself or other persons who have come from the same village or have been interred in the same prison. In many cases, we also ask for information from technical systems to develop additional information. These are the traditional methods of analytical follow-up that have been available to DIA since the war ended. And in most cases, although it was often time-consuming, we were able to collect enough information using these methods to evaluate live sighting reports with due thoroughness. Within the last year, however, DIA has finally been able to employ an additional collection method, sending personnel into Indochina to investigate reports on the ground. DIA has always wanted this capability, and we have tried repeatedly over the years to achieve it. Because these were police states, however, and many areas were completely closed to us, we had to employ other means of getting answers. Because more direct investigation methods were denied us, we were forced to look sharply at all aspects of a report, investigating the most minor of leads at times, and taking a close look at source evaluation to determine whether the source had the access and the knowledge he or she claimed. Because so much was riding on analysis of these reports, we could not afford to leave any questions unanswered. This newest method, employing active in-country investigation of live sighting reports, is just beginning to show promise. It has the potential to provide persuasive answers within a very short period of time on a number of our most troublesome reports. To be sure, it won't provide answers in all cases. For instance, in many cases, a visit to the scene of a wartime event will not turn up eyewitnesses or archival data that will give us the answers we seek. Our analysts have tasked 49 of the 110 first-hand live sighting reports that are currently unresolved for live sighting investigations. Colonel Cole's Stony Beach team has undertaken 38 investigations so far, and these have enabled us to collect information to assist in resolving 7 cases and 1 photo investigation. A word of caution here. Although we have great hopes for our live sighting investigation program, the program is very new and still has growing pains. Despite promises from the Indo-Chinese governments to diplomats and members of Congress, Colonel Cole's people on the ground do not always get the level of cooperation we need if these investigations are to withstand analytic scrutiny and the scrutiny of the American public. The Vietnamese have recently informed us that they intend to oversee the program using methods that are unacceptable to us. We are still attempting to work out formal agreements with the government of Laos. In Cambodia, officials will permit us access to anywhere we wish to go, but they cannot guarantee safe passage in any areas that are under the control of the Khmer Rouge. We are working on all these problems. We hope to be able to report to you in the future that we are making progress in solving them. I'd like now to return to my review of the intelligence cycle for each live sighting report. I've just outlined the various methods we employ to follow up on each report. As you can see, as additional information is completed, findings are collected and the report is reanalyzed. During this phase, we may decide to collect additional information, sending the report back to the collection phase. At some point, however, analysts in this second, more detailed stage of analysis determine that sufficient information has been collected to evaluate the report. In the evaluation and validation stage, our analysts prepare a formal evaluation that summarizes the report, outlines other information collected, provides our analysis of the total, and indicates how the report was evaluated. These summary findings are reviewed first in-house by other analysts and by management, sort of a peer review process. If approved, the summary findings are presented to a formal review panel made up mostly of members of the intelligence community, including representatives from the Department of State, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Military Intelligence Services, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. DIA has no vote on this panel. Only when this interagency panel of intelligence and policy professionals unanimously agrees does the evaluation become official. At that time, the report is considered resolved. Resolved reports become part of our database. They are dynamic records which also contribute to aggregate analytical studies of many subjects, including geographic studies and prison studies. Resolved reports sometimes also generate new questions that spark new collection and restart the intelligence cycle. Finally, the outcome of our approved evaluations are disseminated in several ways. First, all go into our information base. All reports correlated to unaccounted for persons are forwarded to the appropriate service casualty offices for release to next of kin. And I might add here, yesterday we described that there have been 43 such reports that we have correlated to unaccounted for individuals. Cases of high interest are briefed to the interagency group during DIA's weekly briefings to that body. Unusually significant cases are briefed to the congressional oversight committees and to members of Congress on a regular basis. And for the record, I would note that those oversight committees include, and have included for some time, the House Task Force on POW MIA Affairs, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. This brief outline of the intelligence cycle for live sighting reports provides an overview of our efforts at DIA. I am prepared to answer any questions you might have regarding how we do our work. I have with me at the table 4 other people who might also be of assistance. We look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sheets. Appreciate that overview, and we do indeed want to look into a little bit about how the work goes and also what the status is. Let me begin by asking you, you currently have how many unresolved live sighting reports?
As of today, 110.
Okay. How many of those are in Vietnam?
92 in Vietnam.
How many are in Laos?
7 in Laos and 11 in Cambodia.
Now, a certain portion of those are live sighting reports of people living free, correct?
That is correct.
It's my understanding that in Vietnam there are some 42 reports of people living free?
43, sir.
43. And in Cambodia, reports of 2 people living free?
Now 4.
Now 4 people. So it's 43 and 4. Is that accurate? Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
43 and 4, 47 total, living free. How many do you have as captive in Vietnam, live sighting reports of captive?
I have here 49.
49 active reports of captive in Vietnam, captive in Cambodia?
7.
Captive in Laos?
7.
Okay. Now, I take it that living free is in a different priority category or not?
Captive reports, generally speaking, would have the highest priority. Whenever we go into a particular area in Vietnam. If we had captive and living free, we'd try to do them both at the same time.
Now, what is the current plan for running down these 110 reports? It would seem to me that 110 reports with 58 people in country, we ought to be able to have a pretty quick resolution of these reports.
That would be a very accurate view if we had as much freedom of movement as you might like and as I might like. But we have to go through an approval process that unfortunately takes time, and our people cannot, the day they receive a report, very rarely, if ever, can they move right out and investigate that report.
Well, how quickly can you get out now? It was my understanding that we had put to test live sighting short notice, and that helicopters were supposed to now be available for live sighting follow-up.
Yes, sir. That's what they told you, and that's what they told Secretary Solomon when he was over there as well. But I think Colonel Cole can speak to a slightly different reality, and that's a reality of working with functionary level folks who are our counterparts as opposed to the policymakers that you spoke with.
Well, Colonel, have you not been able to receive the short notice live sighting follow-up?
Sir, since the mechanism was put into place and your committee made the trip in April, cooperation has been excellent. We've accomplished 15 short notice live sighting investigations. However, it appears the train is fast coming to a halt. The Vietnamese are beginning to change the rules, as evidenced in our technical talks last week, sir.
And in what way are they changing the rules?
Well, sir, we've always had two problems. One is that, contrary to what we thought was agreed upon by your visit, or during your visit, and also during Secretary Solomon's visit, was free access to prisons and restricted or military areas. Vietnamese claim that was never agreed upon.
Free access.
Free access. They claim that if we are going to get into a prison or into a facility located in a military zone, or what they call a restricted zone, we have to give them advance notice, sir.
Well, we had understood, in fairness here, folks, I mean, I don't know a military base or a prison in the United States anybody can just jump into, even you.
We're not asking for that same kind of access that you had, sir. Correct me if I'm wrong. You had to wait an hour. We're talking at least a full day, maybe 2 days before we could get into these places.
My understanding was that we had a short notice agreement.
Negative, sir.
Well, that was certainly my understanding. I think we'll have to go back to them and bring this up, because obviously, you know, the notice issue is an important one.
But I think, sir, more prominent than the residual disagreement over access to prisons and military facilities is the one that came up last week during the tech talks. They announced to us during the tech talks, the Vietnamese did, that they have done 35 live sighting investigations with us to date. They said they have found nothing. And this indicates that this is a bogus issue in so many words, and that they no longer want to proceed along the same lines as we had been conducting them since early spring. They now have made several demands, the first of which is they want us to supply all unresolved live sighting reports requiring investigation. They want us to give them the complete data package up front. They then want to sit down and evaluate the case data. They want us to produce the source so that they can sit down with us and interview the source in front of them. And then they want to make a unilateral decision as to whether or not the case warrants further investigation. Of course, we reply that this is...
Let me tell you where we met with the ambassador the other day, and I know where the Vietnamese are coming from on this, which is that they believe that this is endless. They see it as a constantly added to list. And so what they're really looking for is some certitude to where we're coming from. They're uncertain, and they have a sense that, you know, at first the roadmap was this, then the roadmap's this. Now it's not just the Vesey discrepancy lists, it's live sighting reports, and so forth. And they keep having a sense of this moving goalpost. That's my understanding of it. My sense is that we would be well served to provide them with a list of live sighting incidents and to say, look, we can get these done the next 3 weeks or a month. Those are the existing live sighting reports. Is it fair to say that plus or minus a couple, the live sighting list is what it is? It is the live sighting list, can't change?
Yes, sir, but what they're asking for is they're asking for the complete data background on each of the unresolved cases. We are prepared to supply them a list of general areas. We want to go to this province the first week of September.
Understood.
Benoit in this
I understand
week.
why you can't give...
But we cannot reveal to them, sir, the background of each case prior to us going down and inspecting. That would invalidate any credibility we have on this thing, sir.
I understand that full well, and I'm sympathetic to that, and we made that argument very clearly to the Vietnamese when we were there. My hope is obviously this is not the place to vet this completely, but obviously I want to state it here because I know that they're listening, and I think it's terribly important for the Vietnamese to understand that this is not a changing, moving goalpost, that this list is pretty finite, and that the more rapidly it can be pursued, the more rapidly this issue obviously can be resolved. There are a finite number of cases which we have now confirmed are finite, because our committee's work has already publicly confirmed that we're both dealing with the universe of 130 or so cases that we're now trying to make determinations about. So if you add to that the live sighting reports, there isn't a lot more with the exception of an ongoing excavation process which will last for years. So I would hope that you could convey to them, and we will certainly try to convey to them, the importance of understanding that this is not an ever-changing playing field, that it's even more defined today than it's ever been before, and it would be a tragedy not to complete this process that we've made so many, with their help, incidentally, that we've made so many advances on in the last months.
Senator, I might point out that I'll use a vernacular phrase here. If we were truly trying to jerk the Vietnamese around with this mechanism, I would send out for the field every live sighting report that I have for field investigation. But in fact, of the 92 cases that pertain to Vietnam, we've only sent 46 out to the field for live sighting follow-up because we feel that we can properly evaluate the other 46 through analytic means without having to go to the extent of having a full field investigation on that report. So I think we are exercising proper judgment in only sending out the most promising of the reports. And I would also say that many of the reports that we send out are basically not that impressive in terms of the information contained in the report. It's not, as I mentioned before, the word smoking gun. We have the responsibility of following up on each and every one of these reports and doing a full and complete job, which we take very seriously. But many of these reports are not strong on substance and
I understand that. Doesn't it make a lot more sense in terms of the possibilities of finding somebody alive, which is the task, is it not?
That's the #1 mission of the Defense Department.
If that's the #1 mission, it seems to me that there ought to be a quick prioritization of those live sighting reports in which there's any kind of question mark of most recent vintage, and that you work backwards. I mean, I would think that sitting there following up on a live sighting report of 1978 would get a little silly to them pretty quickly. It would get a little silly to a lot of people to go back to a particular railroad crossing where a moving boxcar was seen with 40 people in it on some midnight of 18 years ago. You know, it sort of defies notions that you got to go back there in order to find out, you know, the reality of the boxcar having been there or so forth, which is like picking a needle in a haystack. But if you've got reports that say that in 1992 somebody was seen here or somebody was seen there, that's your best shot. And particularly in terms of living freely, you're going to have a better shot of finding somebody. If somebody's living freely there in 1992 and you can find them, they're going to have an awful lot of information about other people who may have been living there in the last 20 years. Now, is that your priority?
All reports are important. However, I would tell you that the most recent reports are the first among equals, and I'm sure Colonel Cole can describe for you the kinds of discussions he's had with his field collectors as they move out into the field to follow up on reports.
Well, let me give you an example. You've got a total of first-hand live reports received in 1992, this year 46. You've resolved 16 of them, 30 are unresolved. By when could we look to having this committee know what the other 30 resolution is?
I'm not sure all those have been sent out for Colonel Cole's people to resolve. Some of them undoubtedly have. Some of them could still be in the analytic process back here in Washington.
My question still remains, by when can this committee expect to know the results of those 30 reports?
I would love to be able to give the Senator a hard and fast answer to that question. I don't think I can. I think what I can promise is that
well, if you have a live sighting report of somebody seen in South...
What can you promise?
Well, what I can promise is that we have just put an additional number of personnel into the live sighting investigative mission. We call it the interim plus-up. And in that plus-up, basically what we are trying to do is, through essentially brute force method of drastically increasing the number of investigators, to totally work off the backlog so that we get to the position where when a case is sent out from here in Washington, when a package goes out, one of Colonel Cole's field collectors can take up that package and go right out into the field on that case. And with Vietnamese approval to maneuver and to get around,
I understand.
we could get them resolved quickly.
But I'm still puzzled by something, Bob.
Excuse me, on that issue, does that mean you clearly can commit to the chairman that you'll have this complete by the time the committee completes its work?
Well, Colonel Cole is responsible for the field investigation. He has these plus-up people working for him. Perhaps he should try to make an estimate.
Sir, there are a couple of big ifs. First, if we get the kind of cooperation from the Vietnamese that we need on this, we can certainly move ahead. Second, General Needham, the Joint Task Force Full Accounting Commander, has put in a formal request to the Vietnamese for us to be able to increase the size of our Hanoi office. And the request is pending for a second full-time live sighting investigator to be based in Hanoi. We hopefully will have that back within a month to put a second individual up there. So if we get back on track with the Vietnamese, we'll be able to put a second guy in.
Well, let me come back to the point that I was trying to get at. The priority is on finding if somebody is alive in Southeast Asia today.
Yes, sir.
If you get a report into DIA and it says, I saw somebody in 1992, I would think you would want to evaluate that in a matter of a couple of days or hours,
Yes.
that it either has the potential of being real or it doesn't.
We have a timeline that...
Okay, now, if it has a potential of being real, I would think you'd want to have it back in the field by fax or whatever within hours, and you'd want people out there.
Mr. Warren Gray, sitting to my right, is the chief of our current operations branch, and it's his job to manage the inventory of live sighting cases. And Warren has laid out a timeline that we've negotiated with Colonel Cole that once we get this plus-up completed to get the inventory cleaned up, we intend on living to that timeline. And if you might want to summarize what that timeline is, Warren.
Sir, we're trying to do the analysis on the reports as they're received, get them back to the live sighting investigators and get the investigation done.
Why
within 30 to 45 days.
I'm sorry to keep interrupting you, but don't you have a computer capacity that plugs in out of Bangkok, and you can do the analysis in Bangkok?
We have done that.
If it's worth going in, you go in right away?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. In July, we received a report. We sat with Stony Beach, discussed that report. Within 24 hours, tasked the LSI to go into Cambodia to check it out. We can do it by telephone.
Well, I'm having trouble understanding how many of the 1992 reports refer to a 1992 sighting. In other words, you could have 46 reports received in 1992, but many of them would refer to a sighting in the 70s or 80s, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. My question is, how many of the 1992 reports refer to a 1992 sighting?
It looks like none of the reports refer to a 1992 sighting.
Okay, so
There were
nobody's
four-
seen anybody living free or in captivity in 1992.
I think we have at least four.
Okay.
4 reports
You
that
have
relate
4
to a 92
reports of
sighting.
somebody seeing somebody in 1992.
Yes, sir.
Were they seen in captivity
Captive
or living
environment.
free?
Alleged captive environment.
Okay. Are all 4 checked out yet?
No, sir.
Why not?
One of the sources gave us the reports that he saw live American POWs in Laos, and he said, I will not give you the location of that sighting until you give me a reward. Where do we go? We can't. The other reports we're looking at to put back into the tasking system to the LSIs. But that's what we're faced with on the last.
Can I explain what we try to do when a report comes in?
Before you do, let me ask him.
sir.
You say you're reevaluating the other 3
Not reevaluating, initial evaluation.
and giving them to the PSIs?
Yes.
How long does that take?
Well, it takes sometimes a week or more to do that.
But if the person hasn't asked for a reward, and the person says, I saw somebody being held in, Camnan or whatever it was, why don't you just say, okay, let's go? Let's go look and see if somebody's there immediately.
What we're trying to do, Senator, is to have our analyst put some value added to that report, fill in whatever loose gaps might be in there, and we extract from our database other reports that we've had previously in that same geographic area. Might somehow bear on it, might not, to include hearsay reporting. The reason that's important is many of these reports, unfortunately, when we get out to the scene, turn out to be either shams or just don't pan out. And we've gone to great trouble with working with the Vietnamese to gain approval to get out to a certain site. And if you're able to determine in 10 minutes' time that there are no watchtowers here, there are no coiled concertina wire, there is no detention facility, it just plain doesn't
So in
exist.
other words, you can determine that it's bogus without having to expend your goodwill in the effort.
No, well, I mean, the problem though is if it is a captive situation in particular, we want to send our analyst, our collector out there fully prepared to include all the analytic background that we have on that particular area. In addition, this is an important point. In addition, if he gets out there and the report quickly falls apart, the Vietnamese, they complain to us that, you've sent us out here on a wild goose chase. This is ridiculous. We're being led by the nose through this incredible charade. To cut that off, we're giving the live sighting investigator a more complete package, which includes other information that while they're out there, if they quickly dispense of this case, here's 3 or 4 other things that you can check out in that immediate geographic area.
Now let me ask you a couple of heretical questions that would come from sort of different sources of skepticism about this issue. And I ask them as a devil's advocate to lay them on the table, not as a statement of belief. But what do you say to somebody who says, boy, you guys are caught in the worst catch-22 craziness of all history? Because you're going to keep getting a live sighting report, and the live sighting report's going to tell you somebody's in captivity, and you got to get permission to go. I mean, you can't just go in somebody's country willy-nilly and
They
show
won't let
up.
us. They would arrest us if we tried.
Well, let somebody be arrested trying to break into Sing Sing or
Sure,
whatever
absolutely.
in America, too.
That's right.
I mean, the point is you need your clearances. You need some kind of clearance in a nation to go somewhere, particularly into a secure area. So this is the catch-22. In our country, I don't think we'd give unfettered permission to the Russians to go into every facility we have in the United States. We'd want somebody walking with them. We'd give them some prior notice so the warden knows it isn't a group of people coming for a big prison break. I mean, let's be rational. We got to apply our own rationality to this. Right. So catch-22. There's always going to be an element of notice. So the doubting Thomas is always going to say to you, they moved them. They weren't there. this is a game. You guys are telling them where you're going. You go out to where you're going, and when you get there, there's no one there, and we just go around and around and around. What do you say?
Well, one of the things we try to do when we get out to the area of the report is to not just take the first information that's presented to us, and typically when you get there, people are sort of pre-identified for you to talk to in some cases. We're not satisfied with that. We try to get off the beaten track a little bit and talk to some of the villagers or passers-by, people who were not placed at the scene for us to talk to, try to get into archival records if they exist. So you try to enrich the experience by gathering in as much information as you can. Bob DeStott has had the occasion to travel very widely in the country and is very familiar with some of the travel difficulties as well as the nuances of interviewing Vietnamese witnesses. So maybe Bob might want to add a little bit to that.
Yes, I think I'd like to comment on two areas. One, the environment we find ourselves in when we arrive at a location, and our ability to cut through screens, if you will, or attempts to screen us from spontaneous information. The second area has to do with the coordination process and some aspects of the coordination process as it exists in Vietnam today. The first topic, one of the no-notice or short-notice investigations that I went on, we went to a small village in Thanh Hoa province. There was absolutely no way for information about our visit to precede our arrival there. I won't bore you with. We landed our helicopter, we stepped out of the helicopter, and very rapidly a crowd of people who were working in the fields and gathering fruits and one thing and another collected. We must have had 200 people gather around us in the first 5 minutes. Not one official. And we sat and chatted with those folks for a while. We asked one of the, our counterpart asked one of the villagers if he'd run up to the village offices and invite the authorities to come down, and he did. So while we were waiting, must have been 20 minutes for him to get up there and these folks to come back, we had an opportunity to chat with a wide variety of people, young and old, men and women, and we got very candid comments. There was, and we can do this in a variety of. So even if we had informed the people in advance, say several days, and they'd had an attempt to password ahead on that. I'm satisfied that from experience that we have the ability, we are given the freedom to talk to anybody we wish to in these villages. And B, that in so doing, both the independent spirit and openness of the average villager out there, combined with our skills as interviewers, we would cut through any attempt by someone to screen us from the facts. The other issue is that of coordination, and I realize you folks encountered that firsthand when you visited there the last time. But the normal coordination process, and most of the installations that I visit are military installations, and the coordination process is as follows. We first are required to submit a written request to the Vietnamese Ministry of, Office for Seeking Missing Persons. They, in turn, send the request to the senior military representative on the VNOSMP, the Vietnam Office for Seeking Missing Persons. He, in turn, then has to take that request. Let's say, for example, I want to visit Hospital 108. He has to take the request to the Office of the Minister of Defense, and he must get the minister's approval, or his designated representative. Once he has that approval, then he must go to the General Staff Department, because they command most of the command functions are exercised through the General Staff Department, or the Staff Department at the appropriate echelon. Once he has the approval of the General Staff Department, then he has to go to the particular directorate that is responsible for that activity. In the case of medical installations, it falls under the General Directorate for Rear Services. one of the four major departments in their armed forces, three major departments in their armed forces. Once he gets the approval of the General Directorate for Rear Services, then he has to go down, in this case, to the medical department, which is a subordinate echelon of that. Once he has the approval of the medical department, he can then go to the director of the hospital and get on the calendar. And they do not have, their bureaucracy doesn't have procedures for short-stopping that, and each intermediate level in the command understandably wants to make sure they're not that they're not going to be blindsided. They want to know what's happening in their subordinate echelons. Customarily, one or more of the intermediate echelons in that chain of command will want to have a representative present during the meeting. And it's not there to so much to, my experience has been that they're not there to control, they're there to simply inform their bosses at the various echelons what's going on.
So it's a bureaucracy like any other.
That's correct. And just to make one comment further, once that coordination process is completed, I found the cooperation is outstanding. They not only, if I tell them I want to deal with an issue that, say, occurred during the mid-'70s, they will call people back in from retirement who served in that facility during the mid-'70s to ensure that I get, and this is at my specific request, or explicit request, but they're very cooperative.
Well, I have to comment that it's not a scientific basis, obviously, nor even a tried and true, investigative protocol. But when Senator Smith and I were there in the spring, we had permission to land on the outskirts of a military base, Dongtam. In point of fact, our helicopter went to the wrong place and landed right in the middle of the camp, of the military camp, not on the outside. Literally 150, 200 young soldiers came running down, sort of half-dressed, they'd been playing different games out by the barracks and things, and they all came over and crowded around the helicopter and around us. And we proceeded to have an impromptu 15, 20-minute conversation with them through the interpreters, asking them if they'd ever seen Americans anywhere in the family. It was totally spontaneous, and they all laughed and said no, and they'd never seen anybody and so forth. Now, I just sort of intuitively, as a human being, as well as with some former investigative experience as a prosecutor, felt the lack of motive, the spontaneity, all the different things you add up, were pretty powerful and seemed to give me a sense that these people, at least that we were talking to in that particular vicinity, hadn't seen somebody. Now, I think if you're there for a year or for 2 years and you're moving around, and there's a repetition to that kind of spontaneity, you begin to get a larger flavor, perhaps, for something. It doesn't mean someone isn't secreted away from everybody, totally unbeknownst to anyone in a community, without, and obviously, that's a possibility, I guess. But it certainly diminishes the capacity for many of these so-called live sighting reports to gain a certain credibility when you see the flow of traffic and you recognize the reaction to people under what are considered strange circumstances in a community where strangeness stands out like a sore thumb, and where almost any event out of the truly ordinary sticks out. Is that a fair, does that enter into your interpretive process?
Oh yes, sir. And the people there are like people the world over.
I know, but
if someone that they perceive to be an important personage asks them for their views, they're flattered at the opportunity, and there is, as you say, a genuine spontaneity and openness there. But to bring it back to our live sighting issue, in my personal judgment, what Mr. Sheets and Colonel Cole were talking about, ensuring that our live sighting investigator, when he goes to a location, goes there not with just one report in his pocket to look into, is very important, because going back to the coordination process, the person who has to go up to the minister and to the director of the staff department and so forth, if he goes up there repetitively, as can be the case, to visit the same location, he's going to use up whatever goodwill he has, because these people at these staff positions are busy men. And so it's, if he goes there, we want to look into 5 cases, and we go and look at all 5 of those cases. It shows good faith on our part.
There's an element of the catch-22 part of the question that was not addressed, but we can come back to it. Senator Daschle?
I have no questions.
Senator Smith?
No.
I have more questions, but I'm going to come back.
Just picking up on some of that debate with Senator Kerry, if you look at the map up there of Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia, think of it as kind of the universe of the live sighting reports. Obviously, that's where most of them are, all of them are, and you assume for a moment that those countries involved, if they have anybody, do not wish us to have them back. Otherwise, they probably would have made some arrangement to do that. And then you, making that assumption, which I think is a reasonable one, you then go to the task that you all have, which is to try to investigate these live sighting reports. Well, it's pretty reasonable, isn't it, to assume that no matter how much investigating you do, if the Vietnamese, I mean, the type of, the overt investigating that you're doing, if the Vietnamese or the Lao don't want you to find POWs, they're not going to show them to you. I mean, so isn't that a reasonable assumption? I mean, Colonel, with all the work that you're doing out there, and unless some decision is made in the Politburo or someplace else to take Colonel Cole to a prison or some location where there's somebody alive, they're not going to take you there.
I would assume that would be right, sir, unless I stumble onto one living freely, say, in a province or something in a remote area.
Well, doesn't it make sense then, and I would be very careful how we tiptoe around this, but doesn't it make sense that covert activities make more sense than overt rumblings around in various areas of Vietnam, going to where they want you to go?
I'm the wrong guy to ask on that, sir.
No, I'm not asking you to get into it. I'm just asking in a general sense.
I can't answer. I don't know, sir.
All right. So, I mean, have you ever seen, have any of you established specifically in any of your investigating, especially the folks on the ground at Stony Beach, have any of you determined any Vietnamese or Lao officials that you've determined have lied to you in your investigation, directly lied to you in terms of providing information?
In any of
not refugee reports, not the source.
I understand, sir. You're talking the live sighting investigations conducted to date.
Right. Your counterparts on the other side.
No, sir, we have not.
You've not established definitively that any of them have lied to you?
No, sir. The cooperation in the past few months has been outstanding, and we've found that they've been most helpful.
See, what I'm trying, I had when Senator Kerry and I and the committee went to Vietnam and Laos, it gave me an interesting perspective, because what I was hearing, what I heard from you guys, all of your people, and we traveled with all of you throughout both countries, I heard extensively that you felt that you could have greater cooperation, but when you got out there, that it seemed like the cooperation was increasing. Yet yesterday, Mr. Cito indicated that as far as help me with the name of the prison, Bang Lan prison. Thank you. He felt that we all were lied to and testified to that effect. So it just seems to me that there is not uniformity or unanimous opinion here that the Vietnamese are being forthright. Now, by that I mean, when I say forthright, I don't mean what they're not telling us. I'm talking about what they're telling us. In other words, are they telling us things that are not true? They tell us what they want to, but you understand the distinction. Not what they're. I'm interested in what they're telling us. Is what they're telling us proving to be accurate?
I think it is, but I think one thing we have to remember here, sir, is if we don't ask the right question, we're not going to get a volunteered answer. Let me give you an example. Sure. Last Saturday, we conducted an advance notice live sighting investigation at the Ministry of Interior 198 Hospital. 198 Hospital. Now, we know from past reporting that the Japanese monk was held in this hospital, and we know some other people were held in this hospital. The first 15 minutes of questions by my live sighting investigator he didn't ask any of those questions, and the director, while being open and cordial, didn't volunteer this. But then as we began to ask specific questions, we in turn got specific responses, and all of them, at the best we can tell, were truthful. So what I'm saying is, if you don't ask the right question with the exact vocabulary, you know, difference between ralliers, and there's a whole list of synonyms that, you know, we think a stay behind, we use the term stay behind, like for Garwood. They have, I think, 6 or 7 different words. Ralliers, Bob and Gary are more expert than myself, but we don't ask the specific word, the specific question, we're not going to get an answer. And that, to me, is not lying. That's just not, they're not going to be completely open.
I can't recall, maybe Senator Kerry can, I can't recall whether we asked them if American POWs were at that prison, and if so, how many, or whether they volunteered it. I don't recall. But I know that based on the answer, they gave us a low number, I think 8 or 10 or 7, 10. And you indicated, Gary, that there were other, many more than that at that prison based on the information you had.
I think
so. That would be an example of not being truthful.
If I could, okay.
I know. Let me interject here if I can, because I want to be very careful on this stuff, because I want the record to be accurate, but also because we're dealing with an ongoing negotiating process here. And I don't want to see any ruptures over misconstrued or misinterpretations, and misconstruals or misinterpretations. Now, let me just say that I was there. I was the one who asked the question. And it was of the guy who was very reluctant to let us in. He was the lower level person in charge of the prison who had specific instructions as to what he thought we were to see. And it was during that initial period, before we were cleared into the rest of the prison, that we asked the question, how many Americans were here? And he said something like 10 or so. Now, that was not an accurate number. But I, you know, took, I mean, at the time, I'm not sure that he was feeling liberated to talk to us, because we still were not cleared to go do a lot of what we were doing. We'd kind of pushed our way in there. And I just think if you put it into the circumstances, you've got to measure it. We also had an investigator with us, and the investigator never said to us, no, that's wrong, you should ask him, you know, there were more or something. So we just thought it was a casual kind of conversation.
I think this is an exceptional example to talk about today. It shows the complications of an investigation and why we need to be prepared when we send our LSI in. I think I would reserve further speculation about this until we could talk to it in another venue.
I understand.
And I would review what I said with you then.
That'd be fine. I understand that.
Could I comment on that all? I think the review process, or pardon me, the coordination process that I described a moment ago, I think there's the contrast between the cooperation I get when it's cleared in advance, and people feel free to talk because their boss and their boss's bosses and his boss further up has all said this is all right, and going in cold where the man is not sure if he's going to get in difficulties for talking to a stranger who's just walked in there unexpectedly. I think what we encountered here was, as you suggested, we encountered a person who was not confident that he had the authority to be candid with you. I think we were also talking about, in the case of the prisoners of war who were held there, we're talking about events that are nearly 20 years in the past. I hold it unlikely that the person you talked to had any first-hand knowledge of the numbers of prisoners there. He may have had anecdotal knowledge that prisoners had been held there. I personally would be reluctant to conclude that there was any deliberate attempt to deceive you. I think you were just encountering a person who was genuinely uncertain what he could or couldn't say, and he was trying to not offend you and at the same time not get in trouble with his own boss.
One of the final point on this, one of the things that has always been amazing to me is why we don't get greater access, and I won't go into any more detail than that, in terms why we don't get greater access in those countries than we have. I recall when the committee went to Laos, and I don't recall the village, but it was a small village that we refueled at with a helicopter in a very remote area of Laos en route to another even more remote area. And we had a few minutes, and we went through this small village, very remote, and very agrarian, I guess, if you will. And I walked into a small building, asked one of the people where I might use a restroom, and they showed me this particular building. And I walked in there, and sitting, and this is an extremely remote area with very little access, and sitting in the on the floor talking to a Lao woman was a Caucasian young man of about 24 or 25 years old. I was stunned. I didn't expect to see him. He wasn't with our party, so I asked him who he was, and he said he worked for the NEA, the National Education Association. And I just find it a little, you know, yet we find we can't get access to check out a report or to check out something that we have in terms of our imagery or whatever it is that we have that we want to check out, and yet these people get access, and I was shocked by that. Is there any explanation for that? I mean, do you know of? I mean, is this pretty common, or was that an oddity? I mean, is this pretty common to see people who are with various internet? He didn't seem to be with it, and he told me he was with the National Education Association. I mean, I don't.
Sir, it's very common in Laos to see Caucasians outside in the provinces.
Americans?
Yes, sir.
Other than, but we can't get that. We can't get that access ourselves.
Not official access, no, sir. Now, we're talking to those people who do go out there. They come back, and if they see anything, they let us know. But there are literally hundreds of Caucasians out there in groups, the United Nations Development Program people. That includes Americans, French, Swedish, Caucasians everywhere. I was amazed when I went into Laos at the number of Caucasians. Cambodia is even worse. I say worse. There are as many Caucasians out there in the provinces, to the point that with regard to life sighting reports, it should be noted that we are getting to the point that we're trying to identify in these life sighting reports Americans who are out there legally moving about the landscape. Those are the Americans who are living freely as reported by sources. These are, in reality, Americans who have a reason to be out there.
And let me just help my colleague a little bit here, because the place where we stopped was actually one of the main tourist centers. It's the town right on the edge of the Plain of Jars, which is pretty, it is indeed small and rural, but it is pretty central to them. It's one of the main thoroughfares in terms of tourism there, is it not? So that wouldn't be unusual. The other thing is, in Vietnam, I believe most of the NGOs that we met with tell us they have access almost everywhere. Isn't that accurate?
I believe that's accurate.
It's a bit of a grudge thing with us not to give us that kind of access. Is that?
I'd like to share an anecdote that will clarify a little of this.
Well, they're viewed as being helpful, right?
That's correct, and they're handled by the MFA.
So it might sort of trigger a few bells about some generic approach here.
When I was in Hanoi, I happened to meet a student from my university back home who was studying anthropology in a village south of Hanoi. He explained to me the clearances that he had to have to go into the village and interview people on behalf of his thesis. And this has gone on for about a year.
I have just one final quick point, Mr. Chairman. As I was going through the chronology of the PSI report, where you list all of the incidents of citing reports, there was never most of the categories, all the categories as you go down through the years, is insufficient data under analysis or whatever, or non-prisoner. But just in '92, you have 6 times used the term captive. Is there any significance to that? Is that referring to somebody other than a POW? I mean, it's just a total reversal of what you've been putting down on the sheets, and I'm just curious as to why that's on there. Anybody know?
Could you share with us where that is on the list?
Sure. That's July There was the most recent one, 30 July 1992. In fact, somebody take it over. 30 July 1992. Well, they maybe have it. It's just that it's a change, and I don't know if it's a change in how you categorize or what. Those 6 terms captive just kind of appear there. They don't refer to 92 sightings, I don't believe. I think they refer to earlier sightings, but were brought to you in 92.
There's no significance in that. It's the equivalent with under analysis, something that we're looking at very closely.
Well, we got into this earlier. I can't recall what hearing it was, but in terms of categories under the statistics, and there is no category specifically listed as a POW. So if in fact you establish that there is a POW with a live sighting report, in terms of this whole overview in the Interagency Committee and so forth, what category do you place that report?
In that situation, if it was determined that a person was actually a POW in captivity, that report would still be in an investigative status, and once we made that determination, it would be time then for some sort of a recovery operation. It wouldn't be time for any database entry into our database. It would be time for the president to decide what he was going to do about trying to bring that person home.
Well, I would certainly hope so. I don't disagree with that. But it seems to me you do have a list of categories. They cover everything: unresolved status. We've gone through this before, but camp information, no POW, MIA information, but there is nothing. Just for the purpose of tracking it, I don't understand why if you're looking for POWs, why don't you have a category for POWs? Doesn't make sense.
Is category 1A and 2A
That's
where it says action required? Do those refer to that?
In our previous hearing in a classified environment, Mr. McCreary raised this issue, but it was in the course of his briefing, and we never took it up to discuss it. Under our current category system, a PW in a captive situation would be in Cat 1. I believe the view graph that he had a previous edition of our category system in which it would be Cat 6. Now, I know that doesn't make much sense in this context. I don't have a copy of it. Perhaps John does. I'm going to explain that. We do have a category for such a correlation, and we would take action on it immediately.
I was reading it yesterday, and I saw 2 categories of action required, 1A and I think 2A or something, and then there was a 1B and 2B. At any rate, now, gentlemen, I don't ask you this to embarrass you, but I got to tell you, this is kind of extraordinary. On your list, under analysis, with all of these, the 110 that are currently live sighting reports under analysis, is number 15019, Ronald Reagan Jr. and 6 others. And it's under analysis. Now, is that really under analysis?
Sir, this individual also indicated that there were 6 other PWs in the area, so we're going back to the individual to follow up on the information. Now, with regard to the alleged sighting or his being the individual holding Ronald Reagan Jr., we can board that case with the next board. So, in effect...
You can do what?
We could actually take that case before the Interagency Committee to board that case with regard to that one sighting. And we'll do that. So, until that case is boarded, it's in effect under analysis.
What does it say to you about the potential, I mean, you found your ability to deduce that Russians are here and so on and so forth. If somebody says Ronald Reagan Jr. and 6 others are being held, do you worry about the 6 others?
Yes, sir.
I'm glad to hear it, but tell me why.
He says they're PWs. We're going to go in and check it out to see what he's talking about.
Sir, I was there when the interview was conducted of this individual, and we are indeed taking the fact that he has mentioned 6 others as a possible element of truth here. That's why we're going back.
And
to
at what date were they being held?
I believe it's
92.
It's 92, sir. It's current.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So it seemed to me that's on a hotline priority.
Yes, sir, it is.
It is?
Yes, sir, it is.
Now, Let me also ask you something which some take as a matter of heresy, but I just want to ask it to examine the record here again. Would your job, Colonel, on the ground in Vietnam be enhanced or diminished by having more people on the ground in Vietnam, more Americans moving around Vietnam learning what's happening?
You're talking about just normal civilian Americans? Or are you talking about people belonging to my unit and the Joint Task Force?
No, I'm talking about NGO types, people over there as part of 501c3s or whatever, you know, cultural exchanges, whatever might be enhancing people's communication with the Vietnamese. It would strike me you'd be learning more. There'd be more intimacies. There'd be more people who become friends or who sit at meals or who have exchanges who might say, gee, you know, 10 years ago, this is what we saw up here. Or that, would you accrue more information, or would it be more of a headache? I mean, I'm just wondering.
I think, sir, operationally it may be more of a headache, because we would then start picking up live sighting reports on those additional Americans in
on
country.
those people who are moving
particularly
around.
In rural areas.
Do you
sir.
currently get live sighting reports on NGOs?
Yes, sir. In fact, I believe, Warren Gray, correct me if I'm wrong, in Cambodia, as things have really opened up there, it's beginning. Yes, sir.
Senator,
well, is this again is this a crazy catch-22ism that you lock the door on yourself so that you can never get in and find out what's going on, and then you keep having this trickle of reports, but you never learn reality?
Senator, I've raised this question about living free reports and the increase and the potential even further increase as more and more Americans begin traveling in Cambodia and Vietnam and perhaps even in Laos. I've raised that at the interagency group level with regard to the potential for basically swamping us with these kinds of sighting reports, living free reports, due to increase in travelers. And I've asked the interagency group for consideration of a policy decision that would basically give us the flexibility not to have to go to full field investigation, or even to consider initially as a legitimate live sighting a current living free sighting that to us bears no possibility of relating to a live prisoner from the Vietnam War, through perhaps the age. I mean, if we've got someone who presents a live sighting to us living free in Vietnam today, where the person is represented as being a rather young person, that we not even treat that as a legitimate investigative item.
Well, is it possible that the situation may have already outstripped your capacity to pursue it? For instance, when we were over there, I remember seeing a French family that was traveling around, some Germans who were over there doing business, I mean, a lot of folks out there traveling around, people jumping into vans and just driving through the countryside. It seems to me that already all these other countries are pushing the envelope with lots of people in Vietnam. There's just sort of an inevitability that you're going to get a lot of reports on, gee, I saw an American here or something, and you know, the Swedes are over there. I mean, how many different countries are traveling around over there now, Colonel? How many different people from different countries?
Oh, you've got tremendous numbers of French, like you said, Swedes, sir. The number of tourists.
But they're all over the place. I mean, you
correct,
can't
sir.
walk around downtown Ho Chi Minh City or Hanoi without bumping into Caucasians, can you?
That's correct, sir.
Is there a message in that about this, about our capacity to pursue these things? I see you smiling, but I mean, I'm asking this truly from a policy perspective. I mean, you guys are over there supposedly following up on live sighting reports. My God, I mean, you could have, you know, countless reports coming in, and anybody who doesn't like the Vietnamese government could just come in with any number of reports they want and say, gee, I saw 5 people over here.
Sir, it's my impression that few Vietnamese report Western visitors, whether they're American or some other nationality, as Americans living freely there. There will be the occasional con artist who will give it a try. And I think in my personal judgment, as more and more Americans and more other Westerners travel and work in Vietnam, we will find fewer and fewer of these kind of reports, and we will also find that there will be, these folks, they come home, they talk to civic groups, they talk to professional groups. It'll become, I think there'll be a greater public acceptance of the fact that there are no American prisoners being held in Province X if we have several Americans who are living in frequently traveling through in Province X.
Well, I think, following up on that point, I think the purpose of the hearing and the purpose of the whole Stony Beach operation and DI operation is to pursue reports on people who are in a prison environment, people who are captive, or sightings of, where people say they're captive, not people, tourists walking around in the street, correct? I mean, hopefully that's what you're.
But, sir, part of our charter is that if we have a report made to us that talks about an American living freely in the context of being an MIA or POW, we have no choice but to report that and follow up, sir.
Well,
And my charter is not differentiated according to captive and living freely.
Well, I understand, but I think if you follow, if you follow up with enough follow-up questions, I think you can establish that.
Yes, sir.
And I'm sure you do.
Yes, sir.
But the point is obviously that if you had another Bob Garwood there, or someone who had chosen to live freely from the period of the war itself, who might have moved through re-education camps or anything else, you need to find that person and talk to them, because there'd be a wealth of information, would there not?
That's correct, sir.
So you can't eliminate living freely.
Not totally, but the notion would be to put some sanity checks on the front end and not put into the process things that information that just patently
Well, now,
it doesn't stand.
What can this committee look to in terms of the current unresolved live sighting reports of the 80s and 90s, of which, as I see it, there are about 60, maybe 70 some, 4, 8, and 60, 30, 60, about 86 or so, close to 90. So you've got close to 90 of those unresolved reports from 1980 to 92. It would seem to me, obviously, date-wise, those would be a priority. Can this committee have some confidence that the vast majority of those will be answerable in some form over the course of the next 2 months?
Well, I would tell the senator first that the number 110 is at the sort of the high end of our normal inventory. We are due for a review board to be held, and if that review board agrees with our recommendations and approves them, we'll be taking somewhere between 20 and 30 cases into a resolved status sometime within the next month. Colonel Cole's people are augmented by the plus-up that I described previously, and perhaps he might like to take a minute to describe where that plus-up's going and where we think our goal is on that.
Sir, first I'd like to revisit for a moment the statement I made earlier about the Vietnamese limiting access. If we can turn them around, them being the Vietnamese, around, and go back to the original mechanism which we had set up when you made your trip, we can return to that and maintain a steady workload, if you will, of doing so many no notice inspection, at least one per week, and a few advance notice inspections. Sir, we can make the kind of progress you're asking for. And I'm hoping that, knowing that the Vietnamese are listening, that they will understand how important this is to us. This is our top priority, and that we're not moving the goalpost on them. We're attempting to work off this total, and that's our primary goal on the live sighting side of the issue. So if we get the kind of access that we once had, we restore this train to its track, we can move ahead.
Before we stop, Mr. Chairman, regarding stay-behinds, though, based on the interview, I believe it was Mr. Destot, I'm not sure, who did the interview with the mortician. You believed him, didn't you, when he said that there were 2 Americans there? I mean, you had reason to believe him?
Sir, he said there were 3, not 2.
3, I'm sorry,
Okay.
3.
And he said a number of things, but he described 3 Caucasians. One of them, we've subsequently confirmed, was Robert Garwood. He was right about Robert Garwood. I would think that he was also correct on the other 2. But I should add a note of caution. He had no direct knowledge that all 3 of these gentlemen were Americans. He had direct knowledge only that they were they were Caucasians. He could provide a good description of each of the 3. He could describe the period of time during which the sightings were made. I don't recall the dates specifically, but it was during the mid and late 70s, as I recall. But he was told by others that all 3 were Americans who had voluntarily crossed over to the People's Army of Vietnam and had asked for permission to remain in Vietnam and were given that permission.
But 2 points. One, Garwood came out. So we know he was an American. We know he was there, and so that proved that portion of him being correct. Secondly, on the mortician's veracity, we also know that he was right on a lot of the stuff he provided on remains.
That's correct.
Thirdly, you re-interviewed, according to the deposition we had with Mr. Well, almost said it, the mortician. He indicated that he re-interviewed with you in '89, I think he said, and that you.
He and I remain in sporadic contact.
And he, again, in that conversation, you again reiterated that you believed him and that those people, that there were 2 additional Americans.
Yeah, there's never been any question about that. I believe 100% that.
Well, then we have a valid live sighting report right there, don't we? I mean, whether they're stay-behinds remains to be seen. They were that has to be established after we find them. But they're stay-behinds. The question is, why are they staying behind?
No, sir. You've taken it one step beyond what I've said. He has accurately reported what he has seen and what he has heard. The one thing that he cannot be held accountable for is the accuracy of the hearsay information that these other 2 gentlemen are Americans.
So he didn't see the other 2? You're saying he didn't see them?
No, sir, that's not what I said. He saw 3 people. Mm-hmm. He saw 3 people on several occasions. And he was told by others that these 3 people each were Americans, and each of them had voluntarily crossed over to the People's Army of Vietnam. Each had asked to remain in Vietnam, and each had been given permission to remain in Vietnam. We have subsequently learned or confirmed that one of those 3, in fact, was an American, Robert Garwood. We have not subsequently proven that the other 2 gentlemen were Americans. Now, I happen to believe that the other 2 were Americans. I mean, why would these people with whom he was associated with give him incorrect data on that? I can see, in my mind, I see no plausible basis for saying that these 2 gentlemen were not Americans. But I must caution that at this point in time, that still remains a belief that I hold on the basis of faith only, not something that I can confirm as fact.
I understand your explanation, and the reason I'm bringing it up here is to try to get a perspective for the part of the committee members and how you analyze, and why I cannot accept how you analyze, frankly. And let me just.
Yes, please, because I'm not sure. I don't understand the point.
I'll give you a chance to respond. First, he says he saw 3 Americans, or he saw 3 people and he were told they were Americans. Garwood comes out. He's an American. He says he gave you a lot of information about remains, which turned out to be true. So you established that he is a credible witness. Now, it seems to me, the way you're analyzing this and the way you do the analysis, and you tell me where I'm wrong, that the only way you're going to get an acceptable analysis, the only way you're going to accept this is if 2 more people come out and say, I'm an American and my name is Private so-and-so and so-and-so, and I'm out, therefore the mortician was right. How do I, what?
I think I've said clearly several times, I accept it.
Okay, if you accept
I don't know how else I can say
No,
it.
let me, I'm not, again, not trying to pin you on the issue. I'm just trying to get an understanding. If you accept it, why do you say there's no evidence? Why is that not evidence? You've just told me you've accepted the fact that there are two people there that this guy says that are Americans. Why then is that not evidence that somebody's left alive in Vietnam in 1989?
Look, can
I think
I'd just like
I
to
understand
hear
the
the-
point now.
I'm not trying to trap you. I'm just trying to ask you a question. I don't understand your analysis at all.
let me see if I can explain what I heard, and maybe that will be helpful, maybe it won't be. First of all, let me ascertain for the record, when Garwood came out, did he or did he not say that he saw other Americans in his debriefings?
He said when he was interviewed by members of the military, members of the armed forces, and when he was interviewed by members of Congress, he said that he had no knowledge of any other Americans.
That's my understanding. And his testimony changed later in time, correct?
Yes. Now, and I think I mentioned yesterday that he did tell one family, next of kin family, and I have this from the family themselves, that he was aware of some number, I don't recall that he mentioned a specific number, but some Americans who had voluntarily stayed, but that he had given them his commitment that he would not reveal their identity.
Let me try to interpret what I heard and see if Senator Smith differs from that. I heard you say that you accept that this fellow said he saw 3 people, and he was told they were Americans, but that one of those people subsequently you've identified as being Garwood. So you know one of them was an American. You accept that this person saw 3 people that he thought were Americans, but you do not accept, as I understand it, to a certainty that the other 2 were Americans, because he only knew what they might be by virtue of what he was told, not what he knew. So you are still in doubt as to whether the other 2 are in fact Americans. Am I hearing you correctly, or?
Yes, I would use different words, but yes, I believe, again applying what I would consider common sense, I believe that the other 2 gentlemen are or were Americans. But you know, I must caution that I need to keep an open mind because I have not confirmed that they're Americans. You know, I still allow the possibility that he could have been misinformed, but I don't think so.
Let me ask you something then, in furtherance of Senator Smith's effort. If you accept that they were, and one of them indeed was, and you accept he saw 2 other people, and you personally believe it, then do you not in fact have something that qualifies as evidence of a couple of Americans being there?
Yes, sir, and I think right, but I think it's also important to.
I mean, the minute you say you believe it, you got a report that's credible.
Right, sir, but I'm afraid that there's a danger that what I have said and written in the past may be misinterpreted. In my judgment, there is no credible evidence of any Americans being held against their will. Now, these 2 gentlemen, if the information that we've been given about them, they are not there against their will, and I make that distinction. That's the distinction I'm making. I'm not saying that I don't believe that there are any Americans there, or were not any Americans there. I make the distinction as to whether they're against their will or not. I should also add...
How many people, before you add, how many people do you have evidence of may have stayed behind and be living of their own free will?
Sir, I think the province was limited that it was 3. I think it was Robert Garwood and the other 2 gentlemen. And I'm not. What I was going to add is I'm not confident that the other 2 men, if they were Americans, are still there. As a matter of fact, I think it's likely that they are no longer in Vietnam.
But I think the issue of the sighting is not Garwood. The issue of the sighting is the mortician. The mortician said he saw what he saw. You find him a credible witness. And I'm just trying to get, you say, well, we'd have to make that determination as to whether they were Americans. And I get, again, not trying to give you a hard time, but trying to understand what is a determination. Is it when somebody walks out alive? Is that what the final test is?
Senator, I'd like to
I don't
clarify
understand.
a somewhat tangential point. Your issue was directed to the analysis. The facility that these gentlemen were reported at in a social environment, as I understood it, they came there for parties with the staff officers of the Vietnamese, has been a focus to us for at least 7 years. We visited that facility very early on to see what was going on there. We have recently had a live sighting investigator go check out the facility. It is no longer what it was reported to be in that 1980 period. It has been a focus to us. We have pursued it. Does that clarify?
And I personally pursued it. I pursued it in a number of ways. I also visited that the location where he made most of those sightings of those gentlemen. I spoke with people who worked there during that period of time. I spoke with people who lived there during that period of time. I've spoken with people in the neighborhood. They can add no clarification. I've spoken with officials at the military hospital where they have been treated. They recall having treated Robert Garwood. They do not recall having treated any other Americans. And in fact, there were no other Americans treated there since 1975. We've pursued it in a number of ways. I've had informal discussions with Vietnamese officials, our counterparts, on it. They insist that, and there again, it's I don't want to overgeneralize, but they seem to be, their comments generally fall into the category of there are no longer any Americans here, and they seem to be suggesting, they're not ruling, if the mortician was correct, and as I've said before, I believe he was correct, what they seem to be saying is they're not here now.
But there's one very, and I participated in the deposition of the mortician for the committee, and there's one very dramatic portion of his testimony. What he said was, and I believe I'm correct as far as one portion of it, I don't think that Garwood and the other two individuals were cited together. I don't think he said that. He may have, but I thought he said they were separate sightings. But the very dramatic thing that he said, the mortician, was that these two individuals that you, in the environment that you described them, were, quote, according to the Vietnamese, progressive individuals who had been sent from a camp in Yen Bai of other prisoners who had been determined to be progressive and therefore, after some indoctrination, became progressive and were then brought down and given some freedoms and brought to this location. I mean, that's a portion of the testimony that is very significant.
I've discussed this issue with him several times, most recently just a few days ago. And nowhere has he ever indicated that he had any knowledge of where these fellows were at. Never has he associated those fellows with the Yen-Bai. That what he has told me is that his informants told him that these two gentlemen were working at an air base northwest of Hanoi.
Well, I'm just saying he told the committee what he told you. I mean, I'll show you the deposition. He told the committee that. He told me. I was sitting right there when he said it. So, I mean, you know, I just point out for the record, he said it to the committee. If he didn't say it to you, I'll take your word for it. But.
Yesterday there was testimony, Colonel Cole, you were going to provide us with some fresh information on live sighting report at the Citadel and also another report.
Not at the Citadel, sir, just at the Ministry of Interior Hospital 198, sir.
Okay, can you share that with us, please?
Yes, sir. I can give you just a brief outline, sir. The report is still coming up through the chain, sir. But basically, this was an advance notice report. General Needham made an impassioned plea to Mr. Lebang after his refusal to conduct any further live sighting investigations to do this report on a one-day notice. Saturday morning, last Saturday, we went to the hospital. It's located near the Paper Bridge, southwest of Hanoi, sir. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the basic facts of the case itself, but it's based on a source who reported seeing Caucasians who he was told were prisoners of war in two time frames. One was September 1981, when the source himself was being treated for malaria at the hospital, and then in April of '85 when he was being treated for adenoids at the same hospital.
We have the full report as part of the record.
Upon arrival at the hospital, sir, we were taken to see the director The director explained the basic history of the hospital. Hospital was built in 1979. It is used primarily to treat Minister of Interior cadre and their families. As you know, the Public Security Service and the Border Security Service are both sub-agencies to the Ministry of Interior. We noticed upon walking into the hospital area that the Border Security Service had a major compound next door. After further questioning, the director told us that Border Security Service occasionally brought people over. We asked about the treatment of Caucasians. We brought up the basic facts of the case. And if you remember, I'm not sure in your redacted version or not, but the name of the doctor that treated the source on both occasions is mentioned. To our surprise, the director said, oh yes, this doctor has just come back from 3 years in Bulgaria where he was undergoing further training. We were able to locate that doctor, ask him additional questions. The basic investigation itself, without boring you with too many details, was that the source said the first time he was treated on the 4th floor of the facility in the infectious disease department for malaria. That was in '81. In '85, being treated for adenoids, he said he was being treated in exactly the same area. On both occasions, in an adjoining room, he saw a Caucasian who he was told were POWs. The doctor in question said if the man was being treated for adenoids, it would not be in the infectious disease department. It would be in a different section of the hospital. That's basically it, sir. There were also other occasions.
Did the doctor say anything about any Americans or anybody Caucasian?
No, sir.
Or anybody
no, sir.
Foreign being
He
treated?
confirmed that East German personnel had been treated at the hospital. They confirmed that there is a Finnish water project which is located near the front gate to the compound that's been in existence about 5.5 or 6 years, and occasionally a number of Finns who had medical problems would come over. They also volunteered after numerous questions that the Japanese monk was treated in this hospital. But that's it, sir. They denied treating any American POWs. As they said, since the hospital was built in '79, there was only, if you will, East Germans and Finnish people. That's all I have on that, sir.
Okay. Mr. Johnson, let me ask you a few questions, if I can, about the Interagency Committee, the panel. Is there a written statement of purpose or procedure for the panel?
I'm not aware that there is, sir.
Is there a DOD regulation that outlines its purpose and function?
You have to ask Mr. Sheets.
Is there, Mr. Sheets?
There is some documentation about the panel. I've reviewed it one time, I believe, since I've been in the job, but I can't recall its details.
Who chairs the panel?
I chair the panel, but I don't have a vote.
And
I chair
are
the panel.
Are the proceedings recorded?
Yes, sir. We have a briefing book that's, well, you can ask Mr. Johnson the question, but I can explain it. We have a briefing book that we prepare for each panel member that includes the original report, includes the summary of our analysis, and it includes our recommendation. And on the front is a sort of a box score for listing each report. And
well, now is the Interagency Committee sort of the ruling authority or power of this issue? What is the authority of it?
Are you speaking of the interagency group that's chaired by Assistant Secretary Ken Quinn, or this review board?
This review board.
This review board was created for the express purpose of reviewing the analytic work of DIA on the live prisoner issue and reviewing the recommendations of our analysts. The policy group that Assistant Secretary Ken Quinn chairs is the group that oversees the overall U.S. government effort.
Is there a difference between the Interagency group and the Interagency Committee?
Yes, yes, there is a difference. The Interagency group, commonly called the IAG, is the group chaired by Assistant Secretary Quinn.
And the Interagency Committee is chaired by you.
And it is primarily an intelligence community organization with some additional representation, whereas the IAG, chaired by Assistant Secretary Quinn, cuts across all the departments in the executive branch that have a role in...
No, at the Interagency Committee, you sit and actually go over files?
Yes, we do.
Files of individual cases?
Yes, we do.
And you discuss those cases and files?
In great depth.
Are all the members of this committee given copies of these files to work with?
They are.
And who are the members of the committee?
Mr. Johnson represents state intelligence and research. We have a representative from the CIA, from each of the service intelligence agencies, Army, Navy, and Air Force. We have a representative from the Joint Staff who sits in, a representative from Mr. Patak's office, the Assistant Secretary for Defense for POW MIA.
How about the National Security Council?
No, they do not sit on this board.
Okay. Do they have an observer?
Not generally. They do sit at the interagency group, though, chaired by Assistant Secretary Quinn.
Now, do these groups, at this meeting, do the decisions have to be unanimous?
They do.
And how many have a vote?
Everyone but DIA.
Everybody but DIA?
Right.
I might add, we get the book with the case files and the analysis normally several days before the meeting, and we outside members, if you want to call us that, go to the meetings, and then there's normally an oral presentation by the analyst, some discussion, a vote, and which is unanimous if it makes a decision, and then we move on.
How often do you meet?
We meet at the call of the chairman.
How often is that?
It's every several months.
It's typically about every 3 months or so. Whenever we've got sufficient cases to review to make it worth the while to call everyone in.
Now, with respect to the current review process that is ongoing, we've been promised since last fall by, I think, ranging from the Secretary, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I'm pretty sure the Secretary, through General Christmas and others, talked of the review of the 2,266 cases, and specifically trying to come up with a tabulation in short time now because of the end of the committee to ascertain the accuracy of the current categorization. When can we expect that to be completed?
Well, I believe we've completed at DIA our part of that review.
So that's in the hands of DOD now?
Yes, sir. And that review has basically had two major thrusts. First, yet another review, and I would say this is the latest in many such reviews, to make sure that all discrepancy cases have been identified. And the reason we need to keep doing that is as we gain more information from our on-the-ground research, we have to make sure that in that new information we haven't been presented with an unanswered question. So identifying last known alive in discrepancy cases is one facet of the review. And in another major review we have, we try to make sure that we have the cases properly located as we gain more information, so that when the JTF people go on the ground, that they're working at the right place and they can very quickly get to work and they're not wasting time trying to find the locations.
Now, with respect to the current discrepancy case situation, the 133 or so of General Vesey, 135, and our cases sort of joined into that. The Vietnamese have been very cooperative of recent, as you said, Colonel, and also there have been an increase in the return of remains. So a number of those discrepancy cases have been resolved by virtue of the return of remains. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
So we are now dealing, and this is very important from their perspective to understand the real universe that they're being asked to respond to. How many discrepancy cases remain at this point in time that we need to have an answer to?
For Vietnam?
for Vietnam?
It's approximately 135.
135 discrepancy cases
Yes, sir.
still remain.
Yes, sir.
Now, I was told a different number the other day by virtue of 57 remains that had been returned.
I believe at this time there are 22 sets of remains that have actually been identified and repatriated to the families and had proper burial. But really, of General Vesey's original 119 cases that were presented in a couple different segments to the Vietnamese, 61 of those cases have either been resolved through the return of remains or fate has been confirmed through documentary evidence which has been approved by the interagency group, which leaves 58 from the original group of 119 still unresolved. To that, we in DIA have recommended, and it's been approved by the interagency group, that an additional 77 cases representing mostly last known alives, but a few other discrepancy cases have been added to that. 58 and 77 get you to 135.
Well, if you had an original 111,
119 was the estimate.
119 was the original. You've added a new 58, correct?
No, 77. There were 58 left as...
I understand, but
okay.
I'm just trying to get what the total number of discrepancies were then. So you're talking about 196
That's correct.
That's
total
right, sir.
discrepancy
That's
cases
for Vietnam. Yes, sir.
Now, did they accept that increase?
They accept the 135 figure that represents the
current
currently
figure.
unresolved.
So currently, Vietnam can look to this and say there are 135 cases that we're dealing with,
Based on what we know right now.
and 110 live sighting reports.
Yes, sir. But only 92 of those are Vietnam.
Correct. What is the status with respect to Laos?
Well, it's a little bit more complex. DIA has identified 64 discrepancy cases that are in Laos and 9 in Cambodia. Those cases are DIA's recommendation, but they have not yet been approved by the interagency group. I feel certain they will be. They've not taken issue with prior cases that we've identified.
And Cambodia?
9.
9, okay. So you would agree, would you not, that it's important in terms of the relationship with the Vietnamese at this point to seek cooperation or to continue cooperation, for them to have an understanding of where we're coming from in terms of these case numbers?
Sir.
Well, my hope is obviously that this process, which has been, I think, a very positive one. I mean, the fact is that in the last year, there has been greater forward movement on this issue than there has been in 19 years. And it would be a tragedy if the Vietnamese, 7 months into the existence of this committee, were to suddenly feel their patience exhausted and not complete the task. It seems to me that we're on the brink of really putting in place a process that has the ability to provide us with the answers that the American people want, and they have, I think, nothing to gain but everything to lose by beginning to shut that door if that is their choice. And I would hope very much that they would understand the degree to which we understand their cooperation. They have indeed changed their attitude. A year ago, we did not have an office that was permanent in Hanoi. A year ago, we did not have people moving through the provinces. A year ago, United States senators had not visited military bases that hadn't been visited in 20 years. A year ago, we didn't have a live sighting report capacity without notice or even on short notice. And I could go through more things. A year ago, we didn't have archival access. A year ago, we didn't have Vietnamese working on this process. So huge advances have been made, and they've clearly been made partly because the Vietnamese decided they wanted to do that, and they were willing to do that. I would hate to see a misinterpretation of these 133 to 35 cases and the live sighting reports now prevent this process from coming to closure. My sense is that there ought to be an orderly way of setting these out and arriving at them in the next months, and I hope that we can do that. Let me ask you, Colonel Cole, you've been on the ground there for how long?
In this job, sir, since September 90.
Since September of 90?
Yes, sir.
And have you now formed some relationships, do you think, with the Vietnamese counterparts on this issue?
Yes, sir. I think that Mr. Zung is our chief, if you will, public security service live sighting counterpart for Major Robertson, and he has been most supportive, most personable, sir.
Are there Vietnamese counterparts or people you work with, or even people you don't work with on this issue that you've gotten to know, that you've come to have a good relationship with?
I think so, sir. It's a slow process, and it's one that's on the live sighting side of it. We're really just beginning. Perhaps Bob DeStott can address more of that on the archival side. I think he's probably got built up the best close relationships. But we're just beginning, and I think we're proceeding in a positive direction, sir.
What would you say to that, Mr. DeStott?
Yes, sir. I agree. My experience has been the person that I work directly with most frequently is the senior colonel in their armed forces. He's the senior military representative on the Vietnamese Office for Seeking Missing Persons. He has given me his assurances that anything that we request through the appropriate channels, he will ensure that that everything possible is done to make it happen, and so far we've been successful. And I should also add that the Chief of the Vietnam Office for Seeking Missing Persons, Mr. Ho Xuân Dic, has been very helpful in making sure that that process works, because we as I explained before, we work through the VNOSMP, in this case Mr. Dick, to the Ministry of Defense and most of my effort has been directed at Ministry of Defense installations. I find the cooperation is good. I found there's a lieutenant colonel whose name is Pham Theo, who's been working this issue for more than 20 years. I found him very helpful and very open.
Did you ever get a chance to sort of have a personal kind of conversation about this issue with these folks?
Yes, sir, but that is difficult. They have imposed their system imposes some requirements on contact with foreigners. I should say some restrictions on contact with foreigners. And two important points in that regard: they are not permitted to have us into their homes. And that's a restriction that they followed very carefully. And two, when we travel, they're required to have representatives of at least 2 of the 3 ministries that are represented on the Vietnam Office for Seeking Missing Persons travel or accompany us, except under unusual circumstances. So it's always a three-person conversation.
Have you ever had anybody make any overture to you, any of you, in any way, in any contacts in any of these countries, that you were capable of following up on with respect to a delivery of a POW in exchange for money or some kind of deal with our country? Mr. Sheets?
None.
No, sir.
None, sir.
Say no.
No, sir.
Mr. Gray?
No, sir, none.
So on no occasion in all of these years do you have any records whatsoever pertaining to an offer to give us POWs in return for aid or money or anything? None of you have seen that or know of that?
None, sir.
And none of you have personally had anybody hint to you that if only the U.S. did this or this, they could get somebody back? Anybody?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay. Do you have any other questions?
No, I don't have any further questions. I might just state for the record, although the hearing was not related to Garwood, his name appeared numerous times throughout the 2 days, and many of the characterizations of Garwood are hotly disputed. Some of those characterizations are hotly disputed by me. I've spent the past 8 years talking with Garwood and talking with people who were involved in that, in his incident. We deposed him here in the committee, and I'm not going to get into debate it now, but I just think just one clarification, and that is that as far as what he said in 1979, Garwood did say in 1979 that he saw live Americans. He made that comment publicly, and he also made it privately. And as you know, it was because he was charged with desertion, which he did not do, and was proven that he did not do. He did not get into that area. He was advised by counsel not to discuss it further, but he did. He did, and say he saw live Americans on a couple of occasions, and also.
At what point in time?
Well, he said it in 1979 when he came out.
When he returned?
Yes. And then he said it again in the Wall Street Journal article. He also did advise counsel to that effect, and was advised not to discuss it further because of the charges against him. And I think also. It's also important to point out that, as most of the gentlemen sitting there know, not to take any credit for anything, but I played, I think, a major role in getting Mr. Garwood deposed by the DIA. And some of these people precede you, some of you here, but it was not a high priority to depose Robert Garwood to find out what he knew about A, the prison system, or B, POWs. And I think that is a very that lends a great deal of support to some of the charges that General Ty and others made about the agency. But I hope that we'll be able to get back on that subject at some point, Mr. Chairman, before we're finished.
Did any of you want to respond to any of the...
I just have one final point I want to make. Excuse me. No, that's all right. One final thing before you respond. In 1986, in his report, it's very interesting because of the comments that were made by Garwood. Gaines recommended that Garwood be hired as a consultant by the DIA. It's pretty, I find it somewhat inconsistent to knock a guy around who had so much valuable information that Colonel Gaines would recommend him being hired as a consultant. I think it was a good recommendation. You should have taken it.
Mr. Sito, I see you waiting to respond.
I have two simple responses. When Mr. Garwood came out in 1979, he stated in front of at least 4 witnesses, possibly 5, that he did not have any first-hand knowledge of PWs after 1970. That covers the people that he knew to be in his prison camp in the South. Secondly, DIA pursued an interview with Mr. Garwood while he was going through the courts on his trial, which convicted him of collaboration, and was only able to talk to him 2 days after the Supreme Court refused him a review.
And I don't want to speak authoritatively for Colonel Gaines, but my recollection of the recommendation that you've just cited, we were casting around for some way to persuade Robert Garwood to be cooperative with us, to share whatever knowledge he might have. And I believe, as I recall the conversations that went on at the time, Colonel Gaines thought, well, perhaps Bobby Garwood's primary motivation is money, so perhaps if we offer him money in the guise of a consultancy, perhaps he would be cooperative.
And indeed, Colonel Gaines became the head of the office shortly after filing his report, which has been declassified and released. He was the head of the office for almost a year, and had he wanted to hire Robert Garwood, I'm sure he could have.
Well, I've been always fascinated by the case. I must say to you that I mean, this is off the point of we're about to end the hearing, and I do want to end it, but I ask you very quickly, I have always been puzzled by the notion that he was listed as a deserter, given the fact that a couple of people were killed by him in the course of an ambush, and the Vietnamese admit that they were killed.
No, sir, that's not at all correct. The people that I've spoke with in Vietnam scoff at the idea that Robert Garwood even fired his weapon. Robert Garwood, whether he went out purposefully to go over to the other side, or whether he inadvertently found himself in a circumstance where he had no alternative, I haven't sorted that out to my satisfaction. But he did not. The Vietnamese whom I speak to, and
so you're saying there was no firefight?
That's correct.
Did you ever examine the bullet wound in his arm and ask him where he got it?
Well, I know there are a number of stories about how he got it. One of the stories is that it's a result of a wound that he suffered while he was en route up the Ho Chi Minh Trail as a result of an American bomb. We have only Robert Garwood's word for the actual origin of that wound.
So there is no evidence. We don't want to make this a long Garwood thing, but I just wanted to inquire about that one fact because I had heard conflicting testimony on it. There was somebody had asserted that there was a shooting and a couple of Viet Cong were killed at the place of the ambush. Is that not accurate?
To the best of my knowledge, the only person who's made that assertion is Robert Garwood himself. The Vietnamese with whom I speak, who should be in a position to know, tell me that there was no such activity. Now, I'm not prepared to make a judgment which of the two sources, Robert Garwood or the Vietnamese sources that I speak to, are being most accurate on that. I'm simply telling you there's a divergence of views.
I know you want to wrap up, and I just want to say again, using this as an example, what you just said, Mr. Destad, about what Colonel Gaines said in that report, and it is a matter of public record, and I encourage anybody who is suspicious of what I'm saying to read the document. It speaks for itself. There's absolutely no mention whatsoever of Robert Garwood needing any money, nor has he ever asked for a nickel except travel when he came to testify or talk with the DIA. As a matter of fact, what Colonel Gaines did say in the record and in the document, I think you know that he said it, was that Garwood was a very valuable resource because he was an American and he knew the prison system, and he would be a very valuable resource. There's not a word in there about money. If Colonel Gaines felt that way, he didn't write it in the report.
If he wanted to hire
Thank
him, he
you.
could have.
That's the point I was going to make. What I was referring to were conversations that I was a party to at the time.
That's how, incidentally, I mean, I don't mean to, I understood you to say that there were conversations in which they said maybe he needs money, and there was a discussion in that context of offering him the consultancy, which is in keeping with what is in the report, that he be offered a consultancy. I'm not sure we're on different wavelengths
Well, I'm
here.
sure he needs money. The guy lost 14 years of back pay after doing a lot less than many people who came back did, and I think it's an outrage, but that's another subject.
Let me,
yes. No, this is a point that I think is very important. You know, we talk about what was done to Robert Garwood. I would like to remind all who are listening that Bobby Garwood was convicted by the testimony of the survivors from that camp, not by anyone else. It is the survivors of that camp that suggested them, volunteered to subject themselves to the rather grueling experience of going to court to testify against him. It is they who did it, and they were not in the military. Most of them were out of the military at the time.
And many of those people, Mr. Destad, have recanted, and in one case, a person has testified to this committee that he was intimidated by the U.S. government. So this story is long from written, and I would encourage you to be cautious with the comments you make.
If I may suggest, this is
Off the subject.
the source of a select committee's investigation in its own right, and I'm not sure this select committee will have the time or the ability at this point to get to that, but it is a subject that raises a lot of questions. Everybody knows that. This is not the time or place for us to go into great length on it. But I think that the last 2 days have been very helpful. They don't close out the process. They don't shut the door on further inquiry with respect to live sighting reports and our ability to draw conclusions. On the other hand, it has been extremely helpful in shedding light on the process, on the nature of the issues raised by these live sighting reports, on the great difficulty in drawing conclusions based on the face sheet of a piece of paper without understanding an awful lot more about the region, the area, other intelligence, other debriefings, photographs, a huge amount of information that has to be factored into interpreting one of those sheets. I think it shows some areas of concern in terms of process. I think you're aware of that. Much of this was old, going back in time. And in fairness, your agency wasn't exactly at the top of the funding line, nor the personnel line for much of that period, when many of this information was at its freshest. And I think people need to keep that in mind, and that's something we will be exploring in subsequent portions of this, is the 1970s history here. But this is very helpful. Mr. Sheets, you mentioned in your statement the amount of time that your agency has to put to this. Obviously, we regret that, but we're not, frankly, overly persuaded that it should be anything but the way it is.
And I wasn't suggesting that it needs to be anything different. I was just pointing
Fair enough. I understand it's cumbersome. But I would respectfully suggest that the entire process is enhanced by that time and by this inquiry, and your directives to those who are in Vietnam will be a hell of a lot sharper for this process, and possibly more rapidly acted on and designed with greater intensity than they might have been otherwise. And I think in terms of the goal that we all share, which is learning whether or not someone is there held against their will or whether we can get somebody back, this process is enhanced by this kind of public tug of war on these kinds of issues, which have been cloaked in secrecy for so long. I've tried to be the devil's advocate and ask a lot of questions about it. I reserve judgment on some parts of it, and I think I need more answers, frankly, for some parts of it. And we're going to have to work together in the next couple of months to enable this committee to properly draw some conclusions about it. Now, that will require some more time. I recognize it. But it would be just as much of a tragedy as if Vietnam were to, exhaust its patience now at this crucible. If you were to exhaust your patience or the process somehow broke down here, let's get this done. And I think we're well down the pathway of understanding differences that have led to different conclusions and questions, and we need to work together to try to iron those out piece by piece, so that our report can reflect different positions if they are different, or joint conclusions if we have arrived at them in that way. And I hope you feel that this has been a fair process in trying to do that. And my sense is it's been very positive for the committee. Long, but positive. On that note, I want to thank you and look forward to working with you in the next months. We do need these prioritizations of the live sighting reports for the current dates. The most recent vintage, obviously, is soon. I think it's just helpful. I think if you leave live sightings out there that are current, to whatever degree your seriousness in pursuing this is questioned, it's only more questioned if the most current vintage are somehow languishing. So I think, however, that doesn't mean you should send silliness out there. Where you have legitimate reasons to have resolved something for obvious intelligence reasons and doesn't deserve it, make that conclusion and share it with us and help us to understand it, and we'll stand up with you and jointly concur.
I appreciate the Senator's view. I think it makes a lot of sense, and be pleased to work with you on that.
Thank you very much. On that note, we stand adjourned until next Tuesday. I think next Tuesday we're being booted out of this room because there's another hearing in here that had prior lock on this space. So we're going to be over in the caucus room of the Russell Building for the hearing on Tuesday with Mr. Perot and others. Thank you very much. We stand adjourned. You got the books here? Oh, Bob? Bob? Oh, nice to see you again. Thanks. Hang in there. Appreciate it. Bob,
This was the second day of hearings the Senate Select Committee on POW-MIA Affairs held to discuss recent reports of POW sightings in Southeast Asia. If you would like more information on this hearing, write to the Senate Select Committee on POW MIA Affairs. The address is 705 Hart Senate Office Building in Washington, D.C., and the zip code is 20510. Just ahead, coverage of a congressional hearing on domestic violence in the United States.